some outstanding speakers. I'm really, really thrilled that Jean and Talita and Deborah will be joining us. And this is a 3-hour session. I know that many will wish to dip in and dip out. But I would say hang on to your hats and stay with us, because there's some real excellent information going to be imparted today and during this session. It's been an incredibly difficult year, as we all know, but it's in these difficult and unusual times that innovation and creativity and ingenuity comes to the fore, and many people have learned to do things different ways and in different circumstances. So we at the Institute of Directors are obviously place great emphasis on learning and enabling directors to be the best they can be, giving them the wherewithal to understand their role in their organization. As we say in the IoD, better directors mean better business means a better economy means a better society. And it's by learning and understanding the opportunities that can present themselves through professional development, and that we can make those things happen. A few housekeeping rules. Can everybody please keep their cameras on if they wish, but it's not essential. But certainly, if you would keep your microphones off, that would be really helpful. So the format of today is that we will be joined by Jean Pousson very shortly. Then at 12 o'clock, we welcome Talita Ferreira, and at 1 o'clock, we welcome Deborah Benson. And the areas and the topics that we'll be discussing will be finance, leadership, and strategy, respectively. We're starting with Jean Pousson, and we're going to look at the finance section. And John has a presentation for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Thereafter, there will be an opportunity to engage and ask questions and participate in the chat mechanism. So please do post your questions in the chat mechanism. And then we will thereafter finish at about 5 to 12. There'll be a short break, and then Talita will join us, and thereafter at 5 to 1 there'll be a short break, and then Deborah will join us. So there'll be an opportunity for everybody to have a stretch of legs and perhaps a quick cup of coffee. I wonder if Mike might just mute his microphone. That'd be really helpful, so that we can enable an elimination of any feedback. Thanks, Mike, very much indeed. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Jean Pousson to you, and John will give us a little bit of a brief biography about himself, and thereafter launch into the presentation, which we're very much looking forward to, Jean.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having us. As Robert says, there's a presentation thing for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussions to take the hour. Brief introduction. I was born and educated in Mauritius, on the beautiful island of Mauritius. Anyone been to Mauritius? From those with the camera on, I can see a few heads nodding. There we are. So basically, I'm French by birth, educate of French extraction. Age 17, my father got a job in South Africa, so I followed him suit, and I lived there for a further 15 years, and I've been out in the UK since 1989. Now, I tell you this so you don't spend the next hour wondering where on earth is this person from. So the accent is not Flemish, Canadian, Belgium, Australian, South African. It is what it is. I'm really sorry. I was once told if I was Welsh. I'm not sure where they got the phonetics from, but there we are. I'm not British, by the way. I have the passport and all this kind of stuff. No need to get married to stay in the country, or with Brexit, no need to get divorced to stay in the country. So anyway, it's all good. It's all good. My formative years were in banking. So I spent a lifetime assessing risk in businesses, in retail and corporate. I'm now, and have been for many years, one of the senior IoD people. You can see for yourself, and I've worked all over the place. And I'm not an accountant, I'm an ex-banker, but then doesn't make me a bad person. And a few things I've done with my life, and hopefully what you'll get, even in the short little synopsis, is a very practical approach to learning and a fun approach to learning, and indeed about finance. I'm assuming, Robert, we will send copies of these to participants afterwards. A couple of themes to kick it off. Emmanuel Faber is the CEO of Danone, the French food giant. He was previously CFO. Finance without strategy is just numbers, but strategy without finance is just dreaming. If something makes sense strategically, the numbers must add up. look, I get it. You may want to price on a portfolio basis. Startup businesses clearly sometimes will take a while before they get into profit territory. You may have some price controls in new countries. Yes, I get all that. But at the end of the day, value must not be destroyed. And a conversation that I have with boards, which sometimes people have an issue with, is can you understand the link or links between your strategic options and the promotion of shareholder value? Do you actually sort of get and understand the financial element of your strategy? Many companies are struggling as we speak, and some sadly will not survive because of what's going on. And saving on costs clearly something which many people have to do. Now, COVID-19 or not, that point is well worth emphasizing. Cost cutting is not a strategy. Never has been, never will be. Cost cutting is like losing weight. Once you've lost weight to what you think is your ideal weight, then what? Cost cutting is like surgery. Surgery removes the wrong, and once you've removed the wrong, kind of then what? You know, it's tactical. It may be necessary, certainly in the short term. And I've been around, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And I have no doubt many, if not all of you, have gone through cost-cutting exercises of sorts throughout your life. But something which organizations rarely do during or post the post cutting is ask a very simple question: how did we allow ourselves to get so fat? What led us to be in that position? Because I think if you don't have this conversation, this will be repeated in 3 or 4 years' time also, because that's the nature of business. And again, with a strong COVID-19 thing here, financial desperation should not replace strategic thinking. You really want your FD and your CFO to step up in this kind of time, especially if your industry is particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 variables. But at the same time, it must not replace your sort of the whole essence of your strategic thinking. The way I see it is the patient has been rushed into intensive care unit. It is unwelcome, it is unexpected. So we need to get the patient to breathe by himself or herself. We need to stabilize the health with a view to get the patient into a general ward and with a view of sending the patient home. So there's a three-prong to this. So it's revive, grow, and thrive, basically. It shouldn't be totally focused on that. And something else, another theme worth considering is this: financial success, maybe I should put sometimes in there, can sometimes hide strategic failures. Microsoft is a really good example of this. Pre-Nadella, obviously now they're doing different things and they're financially very successful. But if you look at Microsoft pre-Nadella, the current chief executive, everything outside Microsoft Office and Windows was pretty much a disaster. They made some terrible calls, buying Nokia for $7.7 billion and writing off the entire value of the investment, paying $26.1 billion for LinkedIn, which was massively, massively overpaid, regardless of how you look at it. Buying Skype for $8.75 billion, which they're busy dumping, by the way, to actually focus on Microsoft Teams. And Skype is amazing. The founders initially sold it to eBay, and eBay didn't know what to do with it, so they sold it back to a consortium which included the founder for about $6.7 billion. Barely 2 years later, Microsoft bought it for $8.75 billion. So the founder effectively sold his business twice. I cannot think of anybody else who's actually sold his business twice. But there you are. Financial success can hide strategic failures, you know. And you can see sometimes when you try and have hard conversations at board level, they say, well, Jean, numbers are good, share price is fine, we're keeping our market share, visibility is good, pipeline is good. What's the problem? Well, there we are. There you are. So don't get sort of hoodwinked that sometimes financial success, it can hide failures, and I can give you many, many, many more. Let's not get lulled into a sense of false prosperity. Yeah. About you, directors, understanding of finance is an essential capability. You cannot hide behind the FD. You cannot say, well, he said, she said. You can't do that, you know. I mean, legally, if nothing else. Nor can you rely totally on external auditors. auditors just give you an opinion. Yeah. And sometimes they are negligent and sometimes they pay the price. But in defense to auditors, take HSBC. HSBC operates in over 80 countries in the world. Now, this is the first of a number of absolutely useless trivia to get into some audience engagement here. And we're going to ask you to type in the chat room if you can. Now, HSBC operates in 88 countries. The average length of an annual report for a FTSE 350 is about 150 pages. For a bank, financial services player, it's about 350. Have a guess as to how many pages is HSBC's annual report. So if the benchmark for banks is roughly about 350 pages. Let's have some chat room contributions. How much do you think? And the person who gets the most right gets a free course from Robert for next year. No, I didn't say that. 1,000 from me, 250 from Robert, 350 from Anna. Not far off, guys. Linda, well done. It's about 600. It's about 600. Don't download it. You will just lose the will to live. So how much do you think are the audit fees of HSBC? The auditors are PwC. How much do you think HSBC pays PwC for the annual audit fees? And again, let's have some contributions in the chat room. How much do you think? 50 million, says Mia. What do you guys think? Too high, too low? Exorbitant? Surely can't be 50. 10 million, says Robert. 10 million? 10 million? 20 million? Yeah, keep going. 76 million. 76 million are the audit fees. It's just mouth watering. Now, in defense of auditors, for a firm of auditors to say, we have audited HSBC and everybody rest assured, there is nothing wrong with that business. For a firm of auditors to make a statement of such authority, they would have to have 200-300 people from the firm of auditors working within HSBC 24/7. It's impractical, it's commercially impossible, it just wouldn't work. So they give you an opinion. That's all they give you. So as a director, I think it's fair to say auditors give you some comfort. They cannot possibly give you total comfort. And then you see sometimes directors don't listen and directors don't listen to professional people. You must remember Kids Company, the charity. Remember Kids Company, the charity? The flamboyant lady, Camilla, what's her name? The case is in the High Court as we speak. And there's a proposal to disqualify all the directors. That's another matter. If you were on the board, well, the trustees of Kids Company, and you know nothing about finance, 2 finance directors resign in the space of 2 years, and the external auditors issue a warning in the annual report about the same thing. Wouldn't you take note? Surely you would take note of that. And apparently they didn't. And watch the court case. That is quite interesting. 1 person, 1 vote. As a director, 1 person, 1 vote. Collective responsibility. You need to ask and ask and ask again. You are well within your rights to tell the FD, I'm sorry, I did not understand this. Please explain to me in perhaps more simpler language. Nobody will actually poo-poo you for this. And if you still are not happy, say, look, I don't want to slow down the board meeting here, but I really would like a one-to-one separately because I'm sorry, I did not understand what you just said. And guys, like children, it is often the most simple questions that provoke the most profound conversations. Some of you will recall WorldCom. Anybody remember WorldCom? The company which went bust in America about 20 years ago. It was in the news this year because the chairman and chief executive who was sent to prison got ill and he was released on medical grounds and he passed away this year. Now, there's a lady called Cynthia Cooper. And Cynthia Cooper is an accountant, and she became head of internal audit for WorldCom. And she starts work, and she looks at the first balance sheet, and there's an item under asset called prepaid capacity. And the figure was quite substantial. And she says, what's this? I've never seen that term before. And she gets brushed off and brushed off and brushed off. And she just realizes nobody wants to talk to her. And in the end, she gets warned off by the chairman not to cause too much trouble. And she smells something isn't right here. So she comes to work early Saturday and Sunday morning with a few trusted staff to dig and investigate. And the whole fraud was uncovered as a result. But it all began by a very, very simple question. She's written a very good book, by the way, about her experience, which is really good Christmas reading. Now, at this point, you might say, but hang on, it's not fair. I can't understand all these finance things. So the Companies Act helps you, and they provide for what they call the subjective and the objective test. If you're a finance qualified person, there is no excuse. You should know this stuff. But if you're not, you can't have the same light shone on you as a result of not understanding. But there are things that you have to do. Now, we're going to go back in time here. Who remembers Barings Bank? Anyone remember Barings Bank? I see the wise owls nodding their heads, and maybe the young people thinking, what on earth is going on here? Well, Barings Bank was 1995. And the reason why I mention this is it's the last example I can think of where an entire board of a sizable business was disqualified en masse. So the entire board of directors was disqualified en masse. It hasn't happened since, to my knowledge, not to a significant size business, by the way. That was 1995. And you may remember one trader in Singapore rang up losses, which was too big for the bank capital base to absorb. Anyway, so the entire board is disqualified. Now, I'm going to ask you to act as judge for this. One guy, a guy called Baker, the trader was called Nick Leeson, you may recall. He was Leeson's boss's boss. He goes to court to try and overturn his disqualification. And this is his argument in court. He says, Your Honor, I get to Barings and I see that we make a lot of money from one division, actually one person. Don't like it. It's bad risk management. He sends internal audit to Singapore. Check this guy out. They come back and they say, all clean. The external auditors come to do their work, what was Coopers and Lybrand, now PwC. And he gives them an additional brief. He says, in addition to your normal audit, please check this guy thoroughly. I'm concerned for the same reasons. The auditors come back and say, all clean. So he tells the judge, what more must I do? I commission two bodies of professionals, one internal, one external, with a very precise brief. I express my concern and they give me the all clear. What more was I supposed to do? Do you think the judge agreed with him or not? And yes or no in the chat box. Be good to get your views here, or just type Y for yes and no for no. Yes, no. Gosh, you're a tough bunch. Oh, a tough bunch. No. Well, guess what? The judge agreed with him. I'm not saying it. The judge said, Mark and Anne, the judge said, yes, you have discharged your liabilities. You have done enough. And that's what we mean by objective and subjective there. So if you're a director and something bothers you and you feel I'm not getting satisfactory answers here, this is one option you have. You can instruct the auditors or speak to the chairman or via the audit committee if you're a significant size. Please, I want a deep dive into this particular area. You discharge your liabilities. But also, as a private person, you want to be able to contribute meaningfully at board meeting. And as Robert was saying, it's about making you a better director. This is what this is about, really, to make you better, which leads to better boards and better decisions and better society. Now, but by the way, just like on our courses, nobody will get put on the spot here. Nobody will be asked questions, I can assure you. So, how many limited companies are there in the UK, do you think? Again, let's have some views in the chat box. How many limited companies there are in the chat box? Marina, 150,000. 6 million, that's a big range. 500,000. 1,800, 3 million. Okay. It's about 4 million. Okay, many are small and many are dormant. It's about 4 million. Now, there's an audit threshold in this country. Companies below a certain size do not have to be audited by external auditors. They can choose to be audited, or sometimes banks will insist that they are, but they don't have to. I won't bore you with the audit threshold, that's for another day. But we think about 150,000 companies get audited in this country. Total 4 million, 150,000 get audited, which means the vast majority of annual report that are lodged at companies' house have not been audited. So do you think the good people at companies' house have the time, the resources to actually check, inspect, audit, verify every single set of account which has been submitted? What do you think? No need to even doubt, of course not. So just because something has been submitted, it doesn't mean it's right. Folks, I've seen stuff not add up seriously. Do companies fail because of cash? The answer is an overwhelming yes on this. However, running out of cash is the result of something else. Something has happened which has caused you to run out of cash. And far too often we focus on running out of cash and we forget that's the result. So we're like, boards tell me, Jean, we need to increase our borrowings to improve cash flow. No. Your cash flow is under stress because of something else. You need to understand what that something else is. I'll rush a little because of time, because a few more things I would like you to do. When is a company insolvent? Well, for the anoraks, I can actually guide you to section 123 of the Insolvency Act of 1986. There are two conditions, one of which has been negated by court judgment, but essentially, and I'm simplifying here, inability to pay your debts as they fall due. Inability to pay your debts as they fall due. It doesn't mean automatic insolvency, but it is grounds for insolvency. Normally, you would go into an administration. Again, chat room time. Is YouTube profitable? Now, a bit of history. Google paid 1.65 billion for YouTube in 2006. It was a one-year-old company. They paid $1.65 billion for that business. Is YouTube profitable? What do you think? Yes or no? Or don't know? Or don't care? What do you think? Not yet? No, says Mark. A few don't knows, don't think so. Here's the thing, guys. We don't know because Google don't tell us. This year, for the first time this year, because the SEC, the US regulator, put pressure on YouTube, for the first time this year, they've disclosed revenues, first time, which is about $15 billion. So it's about 9-10% of Google's revenue. They do not disclose profitability and they refuse to answer the questions on profitability. So sometimes companies are a bit naughty, like Apple. Apple Watch, only Apple knows how many they sell. They don't tell us. iPhones, about 18 months ago, Apple stopped telling us how many actually they sell, which is a bit naughty. Now, this is a point of view for reflection. How would you describe the relationship between your FD and external auditors? Is it combative? Is it belligerent? Is it tell them nothing? Or is it too cozy and too friendly? Both extremes are clearly unsatisfactory. And if I had you in the room, I would ask you to take an oath. Could you explain your accounting policies to the most junior person in the organization? Because kind of you should, because you sign up to these things. So maybe that's one instant takeaway from today. I've overrun here, and I don't want to be discourteous to my fellow presenters, but a couple of quick things. Can a company borrow money to pay dividends? Yes, they can. It might not be sensible, It might not be prudent, but legally, a company can borrow to pay dividends. And we'll look at an example in a moment. The cash figure in the balance sheet is the best determinant of liquidity? Absolutely not. It's one day in the year, and it can go tomorrow. If I really wanted to understand liquidity, I need to look at the full cash flow to get a really solid understanding. Depreciation is a cash saving to replace asset. It is not. It's an accounting thing, and we'll talk about this on the course. But what it does tell you is every company has a certain amount of what we call non-discretionary capital expenditure. Must replace the printer, must replace the scanner, must replace carpets, must replace the fridge if I'm in a hotel, the truck, the aircraft. So a company that doesn't replace its assets worry me for obvious reasons. All assets of a business are shown on the balance sheet. No, they're not. Football players in this country get treated like brands. I take it you've heard of David Beckham and also Wayne Rooney, I would imagine. When they played at Manchester United, David Beckham was not on the balance sheet of Manchester United as an asset, but Wayne Rooney was. Why do you think? And the answer is not, as a lady once told me, only the ugly ones go on the balance sheet. That's not true. And it's not fair to Wayne Rooney. So they're both players. So how come one is an asset and the other one isn't? Now, it's the same approach to brands. The reason is this: they never paid for David Beckham. He joined them as an apprentice, but they bought Wayne Rooney. So if you were to look at Apple's balance sheet, clearly a phenomenal brand, but the value of the brand is not captured on the balance sheet. Nor Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Nike, Coke, all these people. So the balance sheet is a good statement of worth. It is not, and it cannot be a full statement of worth, because some assets and indeed liabilities are not captured by the numbers. And in this very brief intervention, what I hope you see is the course is very interactive. I like to create a kind of fun, relaxed type of environment to make sure people learn and contribute. Nobody gets ambushed with questions. You work in groups a lot. You bounce ideas off. And the main themes of the program are really to reinforce your duties as directors in terms of the financial side of the toolkit. We'll do our best to explain the multiplicity of terminology which accountants use. We'll walk you through the major financial statements with a view to help you assessing the financial health of a business. What's a good business? What's a bad business? We'll look at some of the strategic conversations about the board dashboard that you need to rely to run the business. And we'll also talk about all the decisions that you have to make as a director to create value, to promote the success of the company. This is something for you to reflect on. And I call this when business and ethics collide. So is Goldman Sachs an exemplar and best in class, or are they the evil face of capitalism? I'll let you reflect on that one. And what about Sir Philip Green, Arcadia, Topshop, BHS? Is he the capitalist entrepreneur par excellence, or is he a bad piece of work and an absolute, well, he's not a crook or somebody who lacks morality? I'll let you decide that one. Boards don't have to be comfortable places, folks. And one discussion I have on the course, which is really interesting, is should the BBC have sacked Jeremy Clarkson? If you recall, he punched a producer. Should the BBC have sacked Jeremy Clarkson when, if they sacked him, he would have walked away, and with him would have been the biggest product, the biggest revenue earning product of a public broadcaster? You know, people like Talita, Deborah, and I, we're very, very fortunate to come across all sorts of people, you know, across different walks of life. I've had double Olympic gold winners. I've had former cabinet ministers. I've had royalty, well, kind of royalty. I had Princess Anne's husband on a course once, and my colleagues as well. We've had, and some of them leave you with absolute gems of feedback. And this is one I had after a finance course. This guy wrote on his phone, Jean, I came on this course very confused, actually terrified about spending 3 days on finance. I leave equally confused and worried, but about more important things. And I took it as a kind of a backhanded compliment, basically. But I think the point was well made. I've gone for 27 minutes. My apologies, Robert, for overstepping my mark just a little. Very happy to take questions, and I'll stop sharing my slides now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sean. And that was just super. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for outlining that, and some practical examples as well. I'm sure that there'll be people that will want to ask questions. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can pop them into the chat mechanism, that'd be really helpful. Maybe I can kick off, Jean, just a couple of questions. You know, you mentioned some. You mentioned bearings and some things that are going wrong. You know, we've still got scandals that are happening, still taking place. Carillion, excuse me, Patisserie Valerie, and a few of those. Why do these scandals keep happening? You know, why can we never learn?
Well, I guess it keeps people like Talita, Deborah, and I employed, so that's kind of a good thing. No, but seriously, you're quite right. These things should not happen. You know, if you look at Patisserie Valerie, which is a really interesting case, and there's a police prosecution to follow, by the way. I think the strategic reason for Patisserie Valerie was, if you are a niche business, you can scale it to a point. You can't scale it nationwide. And what we've seen, the people who have rescued it, they've actually closed quite a few stores or restaurants, but they've left a few open. So some were profitable. Jamie Oliver, if you niche means niche, you can't scale niche to that level. That's the strategic side. On the governance side, the principal shareholder, Luke Johnson, who was moralizing to us in the Sunday Times, and who still is, by the way, the CFO was arrested by the police. Not brought in by questioning, arrested. And there's more to come, by the way, on this. The CFO and Luke Johnson, the major shareholder, who was chairman of the audit committee, which is another conversation, by the way, knew each other for the last 20 years. They had worked together for about 20 years. And you could see how they trusted each other, how he trusted him. And he admitted, Luke Johnson, I should have been more vigilant. I should have asked more. And a couple of investors were starting to pick up things that just didn't add up in the accounts. And there's a fantastic book I can recommend, and it's very, very readable. It's by a guy called Tim Steer. Now, Tim Steer is an investment analyst, and he wrote a book about last year called The Signs Were There. And each chapter is about a separate scandal. So you can dip in and dip out, and Patisserie Valerie gets a mention in there as well. Carillion, well, we could run a course on Carillion. There is so much there. Robert, I don't even know where to begin. But what I would suggest to you is this. I think every director should be made to read the Treasury Committee, the Treasury Select Committee House of Commons report on Carillion. And you can Google it. It's 105 pages, but it's not. It's far less than that because there's graph and stuff. Every director should be made to read this. I mean, it is a total failure of corporate governance, arrogance of executives, misunderstanding of strategy, non-executive not questioning, auditors being blindfolded, regulators being naughty. And for me, of all the bad things they did, the most abject thing the directors did, before they went to government to actually ask for money, which of course was not forthcoming, they made sure all the advisors were paid in full. So KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, all the consultants involved, everybody got paid first before they approached the government. And what seems to be coming out, Robert, is we think, because we don't know, but there seems to be a mindset that the board would have thought, well, the government will not let a hospital in Liverpool not get finished. The government will never let a bridge not get finished. Well, they did. They absolutely did. And money ran out. Now, I haven't read it, but a trusted source gave me a Christmas reading. There's a book just been published on Carillion called Bandit Capitalism, and the title in itself made you want to go and buy it. And it's some of the background stuff behind Carillion. It's just been published, and again, I haven't read it, but it's been recommended by a trusted source. But read the Treasury Committee. I mean, Tesco. There's one for you to ponder. One of Tesco, there's a lady called Alison Horner. Alison Horner was Chief Talent Officer at Tesco, HR Director effectively, but she was not on the main board of Tesco. She was the non-executive director at Carillion, and she was chair of the Remuneration Committee. Under her chairmanship, the committee abolished clawback provisions of executive bonuses. When you issue a bonus, you have a clawback provision if bad stuff comes out subsequently. Now, this is not illegal, but abolishing that is just bad form. It's really, really bad practice. Now, forget Carillion because that's gone. If you Tesco, deal with that. Your chief talent officer, no less, has chaired something really, really, really bad. Now, Ms. Horner, who's a qualified accountant, has been sent to manage the Asia business of Tesco, which is all up for sale. So me thinks that this is a little get her out of the way promotion. And once the Asia business has been sold, she will disappear from Tesco. But it was a terrible, terrible thing to have done. Really bad things to have done. But Robert, there are so many other issues. Like should you outsource internal audit, which is what Carillion did? Not illegal. There's arguments for and against, but anyway, and we can go on. Read the report, read the book, and please reflect. But yeah.
It seems to me that you need to get good people around you within those businesses to do the right thing and to enact proper governance. And one of the key roles would be the finance director or the chief financial operator. What should businesses be looking for in those individuals to ensure propriety and doing the right thing?
Well, clearly, out of a finance director, you want the technical capabilities and you want all that. Integrity and honesty is absolutely paramount. Now, how do you test for honesty? And people do this in businesses. We're going to test our values, and you ask people, do you believe in honesty? No one's going to say, can I kind of get back to you on that one? Of course they're going to say yes. I mean, they're just stupid. But I think where you see behavior at board level is things like not being forthcoming with information, okay, which is always an issue. The relationship with auditors is very telling. That very, very, very telling. Because if you hear things like, don't tell the auditors this, let's hide this away, we'll only respond on a need-to-know basis, or when you hear what I call loophole talk, when people say things like, hey, I have found this subsection of this accounting standard, and I think if we change our accounting policy, if we do this, we can increase our profits. Loophole talk. People are always looking for loopholes. And just watch out for just things in conversation. I mean, the first Welsh minister, I thought really struck a really good note about this pandemic when he said, don't ask what I can do. I don't look for little loopholes in the legislation to substantiate meeting people, but ask what should I do? And I think that was absolutely spot on. And it's the same at board level. And if you look at the IoD competency framework, we have the hard skills, etc., but it's about the mindset as well. It's really about the mindset. There will a really good point from Glenn. There will always be people, directors, who will be on the other side of the fence. Of course, there will be. But it's about spotting these signs and spotting them early. And that's why the chair needs to be really smart and acute on these things to see what are people doing. I mean, it's like I used to work for a bank many years ago, and I was director of studies of the TSB group. And one of the consultants phones me the one day and says, Jean, I'm sorry to have to bring this up to your attention, but I haven't been paid for like 2 months. So I'll go and meet the finance manager person. Alan, Phil, yes, well, his invoice came just on the day of the check run. These were the days, and therefore to help our cash flow, we're going to keep it till next month. And then Andrea spotted him. He said, Alan, what are you doing? We are a bank. This guy is a customer. This is just morally unacceptable. He says, well, he'll have to wait for, and I tell you, it's one of the few times I actually pulled rank. I said, Alan, you will pay Phil today. Today. This is and when you see somebody behave like this, you think, doesn't he get it? Now, he wasn't being fraudulent, protecting the cash flow of a bank. Seriously? What's wrong with you? So, and he was in his late 50s, and you think, I don't want to sound brutal here, but if you can't change the people, change the people.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
No. Sorry, I was just wondering. Do you see a sea change? I mean, you've mentioned the number of people that you teach now. Do you see a sea change in the attitudes of the young business people coming through? Do you see a more responsible business, business with a purpose, people concentrating more on doing the right thing? Are you hopeful for the future?
Well, I think great question, by the way. A couple of things. The regulators have gone onto the act. They are asking for more about culture. They are making noises about turn at the top. They are making noises about purpose. They are making noises about ESG considerations, and that's kind of so that those little pushes I think will help. But young people see the world differently. Well, they always have, like we did. But I think what I see in society, never mind this, is there's a mistrust of big stuff by young people. They mistrust government. They mistrust big businesses. They mistrust capitalism. Google reports in North America, there's increasing word search for socialism and communism by young Americans. Because if you feel the capitalistic system has failed you, you look for the alternative. Now, they don't remember Soviet Union, North Korea, just in movies. So they're looking at the other side. They want people to become better corporate citizens. And also, social media is making mass mobilization possible in a manner which wasn't there before. They are seeing, and the HR recruiters tell us that young graduates now, when looking at firms to join, they're asking the questions about the environment, because it's a different questions, and they tell us that. When we look at young investors, increasingly in their investment questions, they're asking for the whole environment thing, which is important, and they just see the world differently. And I think as business leaders, some of us who are of a certain age, we need to respond to that. When I talk about strategy, I make the point, it's nice to have a mentor. It's a good thing. But mentors tend to be old people. We at the IoD advocate very strongly to get a reverse mentor. Get somebody younger than you to mentor you. Children are my mentors, but they don't know it. And I love to see the way they think, the way they talk, the way they spend money, the way they date for the ones that can. It is just illuminating. And there is a sea change. How quickly it will go, but there will be more scandals, because there will always be. There will always be, regrettably.
Unfortunately, yeah. So, yeah, you mentioned what we should be thinking about when choosing a financial director or a chief financial officer. Of course, many IoD members are from smaller businesses, some even quite a number, actually, micro businesses. What should SMEs who don't have an FD but rely on external accountants and finance functions be thinking of?
And again, great point. A couple of things. Firstly, technology now has made it idiot-proof for you to run your business. There are many systems like Xerox, like QuickBooks, who are absolutely dead easy to operate. So that side of it isn't a problem. The trouble I have with accountants and lawyers And apologies to anybody here who's a lawyer or an accountant, or anybody who's married to one, or anybody who intends marrying one. My apologies in advance. Many of my friends are lawyers and accountants. They can be a bit non-commercial. They can be a bit kind of process people. Give an example. I was a non-exec director of a software firm in London. You know, SAP, the accounting package, we did SAP Security, £4 million business, very profitable, no debt, good kids, great kids. And my first achievement as a NED was to increase the average age of the company. But anyway, all our customers were FTSE 350 or government. We had the worst possible quarter after the Brexit vote. Everybody pressed the pause button. It's okay for Barclays to press the pause button, or for BP. It's not okay for us. So financially, we had a really bad quarter. The balance sheet was good. There was no issue. So our year end was 31st of January, and the figures clearly weren't going to be great. So the finance controller and I phoned the external accountant and we said, look, we're not going to rush to send you the accounts for publication. We want to publish it as late as we possibly can. We have 9 months. This guy says to me, and why would you want to do that, John? And I felt like saying, I'm actually astonished you even asking the question, when he knew of our situation. So we filed our accounts really, really late because the previous years was better. We recovered quickly. We phoned him in October. So we tell him, we are going to have the accounts ready for you within days of 31st of January. Please make time in your diary. We would like to actually file those as quickly as possible. Same again. Now why the rush? And you think, that's my point. No, sometimes they process people. Give the stuff to me, have it back. They will rarely say, have you thought about, what about this? Give it some thought. So when in the brief to them, it's incumbent for you to tell them and keep reminding them, is there anything I'm missing here? Is there anything else I should be doing to this? What can I do to improve this? What about the tax? The initiative is going to have to come from you, not from them, because it will rarely come from them. And also, there's a certain amount of naivety in small businesses to think like my accountant will tell me everything. No, they won't. No, they won't. Give it to me, I'll process it and give it back to you. They will, not all, but the majority will rarely add value and be innovative in the relationship. So it's incumbent on you to actually do that.
Jean, we're coming up to the end of our hour with you, and I for one, have hugely enjoyed your thoughts and some of your comments and your perspectives. I think that's one of the most important things, that directors and leaders, we need to have a perspective on things that matter to us, that make us better directors. What would be your final thought to those on the call, on the webinar rather, this afternoon? In terms of things that a leaving card that you'd like to leave them with. And I know that next year, when things will hopefully get better, we may have the pleasure of seeing you in person at one of our professional development courses that we're going to be running in the ICC, which is midway between Southwest and Wales for members. So the International Convention Centre. So we may have that opportunity of seeing you then. But what's your final thought? Your Jerry Springer final thought, John, if you have one.
That's a name I haven't heard for a long time, Jerry Springer. I think in line with your interest in being here in the first place, I think all of us as executives, as leaders, as directors, we need to constantly, continually learn to learn, but also learn to unlearn. Especially if I put my finance hat on for a moment. If finance is not your thing, I guarantee you a 3-day course will not do it for you. It will help greatly, but it will not do it for you. There has to be an ongoing responsibility to learn and learn and learn. And I've given you some light Christmas books here. And one of my objectives when I run the finance course is to leave you with an appetite that finance can be fun, finance can be interesting, and for you to continue with your learning, and also to continue to reflect on what I call unlearning. You know what they say? Experience is great as long as the future resembles the past. If that's it, basically.
That's great, Jean. Thank you so much. And you mentioned learning, and we've learned a lot this morning. You also mentioned continuous development in your presentation to us, and that's what the IoD is all about. It's all about making you a better director, and you've given us some seeds and some information today, which I'm sure many of us will be remembering for quite some time to come. And we look forward to seeing you in person. Ladies and gentlemen, can you thank Jean very much indeed. As if by a very good DJ link, you mentioned leadership, and Talita, who's on the call, will be giving her presentation on leadership very shortly. I suggest we have maybe 5 minutes to stretch your legs if you wish to, and then we'll come back at 12:02 and have the opportunity to meet and hear from Talita. But in the meantime, once again, Jean, thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to seeing you, and have a happy Christmas.
You too. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we'll come back, ladies and gentlemen, at 12 o'clock, actually. It's 11:54 now. We'll be back for 12 o'clock. Thank you. What we in the IoD believe is so important for directors, to enable them to have the wherewithal and understanding of what they should be knowing to make themselves better directors, which, as I've said before, lead to better business and then better economy, and the things that we believe are so interlinked. I'm really thrilled to see Talita and Jean with us, and to also welcome Deborah, who's going to be speaking later on. I've been on a course that Talita ran, and it was just amazing. And it's very hard, I know, to encapsulate information about leadership in just a 20 minutes or half an hour period of time. But I'm sure that we will learn, as we have already, an awful lot from Talita, and pick up on some themes which are relevant and appropriate and pertinent to our day-to-day working lives. Can I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if you do wish to ask questions, please do place them into the chat mechanism, and then we'll touch on them later on. But in the meantime, can I now hand over to Talita for your presentation. Talita, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here with you. So just a little bit about me and my background. You might have also noticed that the accent is a bit different, and I was born and educated in South Africa, but I did spend quite a while in Germany, so South Africans tell me that my accent is not as pure as it should be anymore, but I'm sure it's not exactly English either. I've worked for big brands. I did my articles. I'm a qualified chartered accountant, and I did my articles with KPMG. I then worked for banks in South Africa, Investec, and a small boutique bank. And then I started my career with BMW, where I spent 17 years. And now I'm on the board of Ford Credit Bank, and I'm the chair of their audit committee. And I spent 17 years with BMW globally, moving around, working in 4 different countries. And it's a journey that I didn't really anticipate. But even more so, I worked extremely hard to get into that top 300 leadership group of BMW. And then I'd say I kind of surprised myself, because I got there and I kind of still had probably 20 years of my working life left, and felt that I probably didn't want to spend it in that group, but I also didn't want to spend it being a CFO and Chief People Officer. So I decided to totally challenge myself and become an entrepreneur, which is, of course, why I'm standing in front of you. And when I was at BMW, I was the Chief Financial Officer and Chief People Officer of BMW Financial Services, so their captive financing arm, and later of BMW UK Limited. And the very interesting thing is, in that first week when I became the CFO and Chief People Officer of Financial Services, I had a meeting with the CEO. And he told me that my department was the business prevention department. So if it was up to my finance and HR teams, we would have no business left. And he said as well, if you're like the CFOs who have come before you, then of course you won't spend a lot of attention on leadership and HR, in which case it'll report to me soon in any case. So don't worry about that too much. And you can see I like red, and it was a little bit like a red rag to a bull. And I decided that I would prove him wrong, that I wouldn't be like the previous CFOs, and I wouldn't lead HR and the people division like a controller. I would really do something very different. And it really started to put my career in a totally different place, because I wanted to find out what drove people, what motivated people, how do you build really high-performing teams, how do we create a sense of belonging in an organization through culture. And of course, I went on to create award-winning cultural change programs in organizations cross-border, because it became such a passion of mine, which I had never anticipated. I am a charter director, and many years ago, I chartered as a charter director because I thought that I didn't really understand my role as a director. When I was made that chief financial officer and chief people officer, I knew very little about my collective responsibilities as a board director, and went on to also encourage other directors on our boards to do the IoD courses to understand especially their governance responsibilities and their responsibilities in creating culture, which I will touch on again. I've already mentioned I'm a non-executive director with Ford Credit Bank. It is a bank in the UK, and so we have the whole prudential regulation, and I can honestly say that I sit with two challenges. I sit with the challenges of a prudential bank in the UK, but then also the challenges of Ford Credit being held by a motor company and not always understanding what we need to do and why we need to do banking regulation. So it's quite a challenging role, and it's really amazing to sit on that board and have that dual view there. I launched my first book about leadership in 2016, just after I left BMW. And I'm busy with the second one now, which is the 7 Shifts to the Transformation of Great Leadership. And yes, it's exciting when you have to write down what you really think about leadership. That also focuses the mind really, really well. And I struggled so long with myself, feeling like I was these two different people, this analytical CFO, good at risk management, but then also this people-orientated, very culturally orientated people leader. And I can honestly say that in the last few years, I've now sorted myself out, and I really believe that I'm these two perfect halves of a whole. And I'm very passionate about growing the next generation of business leaders, and business leaders that are more connected to their leadership. So I mainly spend my time doing 4 things: training directors, as I do for the IoD, mentoring and coaching either high potential finance professionals, operations directors, or HR directors ready to take positions, or they are already in those board positions. I am the NED and chair of Ford Credit. And then for my sins, I've decided to create an online business where I'm trying to convince more finance professionals to be more in touch with their leadership and team dynamics, which sometimes feels a little bit like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, to be very honest, but it's a challenge that I'm really up for. If we look at leadership, I really feel that there are 3 areas to leadership for directors. And there's the part of the leadership that's about our specialism, whether you the CFO, whether you the chief marketing officer, whether you the operations director, whether you the CEO, or whether you're a NED. It's all about those day-to-day things that we need to do to complete our specialism, to be in that role that we have been placed in. But then there are 2 other dimensions. There's the dimension of leading yourself, where you're developing, growing, understanding what your values are, understanding what your strengths are, understanding who should I really recruit into my team to complement my skills, not just getting clones of myself, because if I very much get clones of myself, they might be really easy to manage and to enthuse and to motivate, but I won't have any innovation, and I won't really get to a new way of doing things because we might all be the same. And John mentioned one word that I think is also really important in this leading yourself, which is mindset, and working on our mindset as leaders and focusing on whatever it is that we need in that moment. Is it agility that we need today in COVID? Is it, less of a risk-averse approach that we need? Whatever it is in our mindset, really thinking and growing that too. And then the third thing is that continually engaging people and creating teams and coaching people. And I find that very often people think, especially directors, because they're already so busy, that this is my regular team meeting, or that maybe once or twice a year, that team event where I engage people and I really inspire them. But actually, it's something that we're doing all the time. It's changing fundamentally how we run our meetings, that we are always engaging our people, that we're always understanding what is it that matters to them. And I'd like to ask you in the chat box, just tell me your views from the leaders that you generally see, and probably from yourself and your organization. Where do you think you spend the most time? Is it on achieving the targets, objectives, especially in number 1, or is it on those other 2? And then when we're learning and developing for ourselves, are we sharing that with your team? So please let me know in the chat box, where do you think we're spending most of our time? Yeah, too much crisis management, running the business. Yes, so actually on the first one. Yes, leading the enablers. Yes, I love that. Yes, most time is spent running the business. Oh, it's great that someone's identifying potential. That's great. Yes. Yes, down in the data. Yes, exactly. So it's really my experience too, that we spend most of our time on the first one, on really getting the job done, on crisis managing, and not really on developing ourselves or developing those teams in an effective manner. So the course content for leadership is in 5 sections, and I'm just going to give you some headlines. So the first one is about defining leadership, and we speak very much about the role of the board, the creation of that vision, the future state, the mission, what it is we do, but then purpose, and I will come to purpose later. It's very much about thinking, what is our purpose? How do we add value? What is our role as board directors? And the second thing is all about different leadership styles and followership. And one of the things that people really note when they leave the course is that there's not one size fits all. There are different leadership styles, and because of the context or the situation, we as leaders probably need to use different leadership styles, even if they're not the ones that might be in our comfort zone. We might need to adapt. Then the second part is understanding ourselves and others. It's very much about emotional intelligence and influence. And I do think this is the thing that makes the biggest difference in a board director's life, is if you have that emotional intelligence to read the room, to read your people, to individualize your leadership approach. We also learn about decision-making and biases are a new field of development. And it's just not good enough as a board director to know which biases we have and then say, okay, I have those biases. We have to actively work against those biases. Another very interesting area is talent and motivation. So someone was saying enabling and getting the great talent. That is, of course, what we're there for, to make sure we have a right, diverse pipeline of talent who thinks in a way that will help us survive in the future. And it's about motivating that group of talent. And I'll say a little bit about that a little bit later. Then on leading teams, it's about how do we create successful teams? And of course, the board is a team. And very often the board could be very high performing, and all of a sudden you have a new CEO. I had 3 CEOs in 5 years, which in financial services is quite radical, because they all try and change the ship, which is a little bit like a tanker. But the interesting thing is, one of the CEOs that came in took a very high performing team and changed it into a fractured board. And it's understanding, where is our board? Is it fractured? Does it have a lot of groupthink? Is it in apathy? What is going on with that board? and trying to understand what are some of the challenges that we face within organizations and boards. And then the next section is all about leading the organization. And I find that culture is one of the most important things that we learn as directors, because culture is everything. It's behavior, it's how things get done, and it's understanding, how that links back. And one of the most important books that I've ever read, Jean gave some great recommendations, is Change the Culture, Change the Game. And it's all about strategic change and how important behaviors are actually within that change and how important it is for the board to role model those behaviors. We also learn about managing risk and, of course, a crisis like the crisis we're in now, ethics and innovation and change. And the reality is that 75% of change programs still fail. So it's really important to understand why they fail and what we can do as board directors to hold our organizations back from that failure. And the last part is leading beyond the organization. And that is more about responsible leadership, taking care of the environment, taking care of society. So the whole ESG movement towards more sustainable development, the social economy, and then also stakeholders. How do we manage stakeholders and make sure that we keep them close or that we manage them closely? And what criteria could we use there? So basically that's the course content in a nutshell. I spoke about purpose, and purpose should really be at the heart of what organizations do. Jean spoke a little bit about how the trend is changing and millennials will be our future customers. I think no matter which organization you're in, even if we do talk automotive, I love to sometimes use examples of automotive. One can imagine that the profile of a customer who's driving a BMW, for instance, is perhaps a white male between 40 and 50. Who knows how that will change in the future with millennials and will they even want to drive cars? And it's things understanding that purpose is the thing that really connects us and creates that emotional connector. It's also important that we still attract the talent. And if we don't have a purpose that really resonates, that could be quite a distractor for us as an organization. The best purpose that I've ever heard was when I was in Scotland, a training company who said, we upskill people to secure the future of Scotland. So such a great purpose for a training company. And so I'm always challenging, at the heart of everything in leadership is really that purpose. But purpose can also be a huge motivator in terms of division. So when that CEO told me that my teams, my collective teams, IT, HR, finance, risk, that they were the business prevention department, I kind of went and looked, how can I create a sense of belonging? And I came across Simon Sinek. And it's really about creating something that creates a sense of belonging for a department where people can feel like they know what's in it for them and they can find how they belong. And one of the things that we created together as a team was then that we're the enablers of the business. And very often when we then made these decisions and said, well, we don't think we should write the business, it was, maybe we should think about, are we the enablers? Are we being enablers now? So it started to guide everything we did. And one of the other things on a leadership level is that was most astounding when I did one of the training courses, and I do this with every director that I mentor, is I ask them, what is your leadership purpose? Do you understand your leadership purpose within this organization? And the answers that I get are actually quite wide-ranging. Would you like to tell me in the chat box which of these you would say you focus on? Do you focus on 1, 2, and 3? Have you focused on just a purpose for your organization? Of course, if you're a divisional director, 2 would be applicable. If you're not, it wouldn't. Just give me some insights in the chat box. Do you think you spend time on all 3? Or is there one specifically that you would be spending time on? Yes, good. Great, Linda, that you're spending time on all 3. Very good. Very good. Yes. So what I find when I speak to CFOs, they've probably done the first, but not the second and third. So some of the operational directors are better at it. When people are in HR, they tend to spend it for the organization, but not for their own team. And in IT, I also find IT sometimes when I work with IT directors that there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So what are some of the leadership challenges that I see? And so at the beginning of a course, we always ask everyone, tell us a little bit about your leadership challenges. And I've run about 6 of these training courses in the last 3 months. So I've just collected, what people have said. And one of the things is we're afraid to leave our comfort zone. That focusing on our core specialism and not really leaving our comfort zone more towards the people side, that's one of the things that we see quite often. And it's because we're not used to it. We don't really know how to engage and motivate. And so we just go with safety and what we're normally used to. I think the issue of thinking that we should know it all, the team should know it all. As a collective team, we should know it all. I, as the director, don't always need to know it all, but I think that's one of the things that really, when directors are very open, that's one of the things that they share. And engaging and motivating people, there's no recipe and there's no one size fits all. So I also tutored the Russian group a couple of weeks ago, and a question was, what's the recipe? Show me the book with the best purpose statement and the values that fit under it so that I can duplicate it. And that's not how it works. It's, it's a individualization, seeing people in the team for who they are, seeing people in the organization with the challenges that it has, and then finding what motivates and drives the people that we have or the talent that we want to attract. Sometimes the focus is on the wrong areas, especially when we have new board directors. I find that the ramp up to that strategic thinking, the ramp up to the collective responsibility for creating the culture, that takes the back seat. And it takes the back seat to just getting the job done, focusing on running the business. And perversely, when directors start to focus more on the others, things kind of fall into place. And so it's that, I suppose it also has to do when we take over a new role, you want to show and prove that you can do it. And sometimes the focus might be on the wrong areas. One of the other very interesting things is that culture is actually a capability. So if we think of 3 elements to capability, it's competence, capacity, and culture. And of course, competence, we can go out, if we have an organization with a good culture, we can attract the right competence. We can hire good people. We can, for instance, go get the best engineers or the best software engineers or the best bankers or treasury specialists. And capacity, we can do mergers, joint ventures, partnerships, things like that to get the capacity. But the one part of the capability that we find that directors don't spend the time on is creating the culture that they want. And that, of course, is something that can then bite quite badly. And people often say to me that culture is the really difficult part of the capability, and it's the really hard part to get right. I recently interviewed Sir David Walker for a series that I'm running on what makes a great leader. And he ran in 3 of his positions. He worked for the Queen directly. He's a retired Air Force general. And one of his roles was running the Queen's household. And the interesting thing is when we started our interview, he immediately started to speak about culture because of the work that he'd done before. And he said, the most important thing, and he's now on boards as well, he's the chair of one board and he sits on various other boards. And he said, the most important thing is to focus on the elements of the culture you want. Don't let it just be by accident. Don't let the culture grow organically and it's by accident. Do it by design and what you want. And it's, of course, one of the biggest challenges that we see because people believe that culture is really difficult. But I honestly believe it's a function of the time and effort you spend on it. Just as leadership is, are we only focusing on that one thing, or are we focusing on multiple things? Let me know in the chat box if one of these resonate with you. So which of these challenges might resonate with you as a director? What intuitively feels like that might be something that might be at the bottom of what's a challenge for us as an organization? Yes, so Robert is saying all in varying degrees. Yes, without engaging at all the levels, it's difficult to change the culture and the mindset, definitely. Time and effort virtually, yes, I totally get it. The crisis is like ruining a lot of this for us. I love that. From Muir, culture eats strategy for breakfast, yes. The leadership and the culture is key. Yes, most of the organizations who understand that are the ones who are leading best through the crisis, I would say. And then areas that delegates remember. So this is my last slide. And what we normally ask at the end of the course is we ask delegates, so what of the course stood out for you? What is it that you'll remember, that you'll go and implement tomorrow, that had the biggest impact on you? And I wanted to share a few of those. So the one is motivation. So during the course, we really share a couple of models. We share Maslow, which everyone knows. We share Hertzberg. We share Daniel Pink's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But we also look at a survey that's been run for a very long time. And we then look at that survey and what motivates people. And the interesting thing is that what we as leaders think motivates employees doesn't really motivate them. And so that's quite interesting, an interesting thing for people to realize. I often have directors say emotional intelligence and how important it is. And I often share how I used to treat our marketing director and marketing and sales director when I just became a CFO with these bad business cases. And I always say that I probably thought he was an idiot, but I was very polite. And of course, my body language probably said it all. And if we look at the neuroscience, we are contagions as leaders. So I was probably giving him all these wrong vibes. And so I had to find different ways to impact his area to go on a journey with us. And it's only with higher emotional intelligence that I realized, the error of my ways. And so emotional intelligence is something that unlocks quite a lot for directors when they realize the impact that they have, especially in the boardroom or with other leaders. The other thing is the dynamics in the boardroom. And we look at fracture, we look at groupthink, we look at apathy, and of course, high performance. And it's always interesting when directors start to share where they have seen boards that they sit on or where they are in their board. And as one director put it to me, they were a perfectly functioning board until they put a really hot topic into the mix, and then the board fractured. And that whole process of getting them out of fracture and for the chair to lead them back to high performance was quite an interesting journey. The other one is the board as a team. I think sometimes we don't spend as much time to bond and connect as a team, to understand the board's strengths, to understand maybe the weaknesses in the board, to understand how we make decisions as a board. And those dynamics as a board team is, of course, extremely important, especially when you face critical issues like we have now in COVID. And we often have directors who say, COVID has fractured us and we're not really in a good place because of what's happened. And the next one is really culture. And as I said, change the culture, change the game. Phenomenal book that really made me think differently about strategy. And it's really about all the behaviors and how we role model those as a board from the top. And I think that makes an immense impact on people. And as an ex-CFO, I also believe what gets measured gets done. So if we don't reward and recognize the right type of behaviors, surprise, surprise, we'll never create the right type of culture. And tied very closely to that is the role modeling from the top. So I often have people who at the end of the course say that role modeling is such an important part and something that they should spend more design time on, if I could call it that. Like Sir David Walker said, don't let it happen by accident, let it happen by design. Driving successful change, That's one of the takeaways that people have, because we look at why change fails and how to be more successful at change, and that everything is actually change. And the main way to do that is through your culture and through the behaviors. So there's always, whenever there's a technology project implementation, whatever there is, we want people to do something differently. And at the moment, I don't see our organizations filled with robots. They are still filled with people. So it's kind of, if we don't get them to behave differently, nothing will work. And I often see it in finance transformation projects, especially, that we think it's a finance transformation, it's a system change. We never think about the people and the behaviors that they need to change. And that's why there's such a huge failure rate still in change. And one of the last things that people really like is stakeholder mapping. And I've even had some directors, CEOs of small SMEs who want to map out their client list the way we help with stakeholder mapping, as it brings such a rich amount of value. So those are the areas that our delegates mainly remember. And maybe I can ask you again, if there's something that stands out for you on this list, where you would say, well, that sounds really interesting, or that sounds like something where we could really develop. So let me know in the chat box if there's something there that resonates with you. Yeah, great comment from Jean there about culture and directors not embracing the tools and understanding about themselves. Yeah, great, Robert. I think you were one of the people who said culture made such a difference for you in the course. Yes, unified culture when you're made up of a board of Neds, definitely. The board as a team, yes. Yes, and change is through people, not to people. Great comment, Michael. Yeah, great comment, Glenn. Yes, the area of culture and behaviors. Actually, every strategic change, every little change that we want to drive is about making people behave differently, or not making them, asking them to behave differently and inspiring and motivating them to behave differently. So I've come to the end of the formal part. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the video outline. And Robert, I'll open it up to you again. You muted, Robert.
I'm double muted. I'm muted on the system and on my my microphone as well. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was hugely impressive and enjoyable, and gives such a great insight to both the course, but also, as you did, to touch on some of the salient points and develop them. I would invite anybody that wishes to ask questions or to raise comments to please do so in the chat mechanism. And while people are doing that, of course, culture is at the heart of everything and so important. And directors in a business that recognize when the culture isn't right, but how can they change it? And that's one of the key things. Is it force of nature in terms of their leadership style, or what are the key tricks to be able to influence and develop and generate a culture which is commensurate with aspirations of the business?
What I like to do when I work with boards on culture is to say, what are the values you think you need to be successful? And let's just take one like innovation. There are so many boards now who say we need innovation as a value. And then just take that innovation and kind of strip it apart and say, what behaviors do you have today that doesn't suit your innovation at all? So it's kind of like, what behaviors must we leave in the past? So I always start there. And those are things like having rigorous meetings that are planned from A to Z, with time pressure, no time for brainstorming. If you want an innovative culture, that's not going to bring you innovative culture. Innovative culture will be there when you spend more strategic time brainstorming, create that within the schedule, for instance, reward people for new ideas. So so one of the things that I would do is then to say, okay, what do we do today that we shouldn't be doing anymore? That language of we've tried that and it doesn't really work. So really just a brain dump of what do we do today that won't serve us? Then making a really concerted effort towards saying, okay, but what do we want people to believe about innovation? So then I move to beliefs. And those are things like innovation is at the heart of everything we do. And you just list those beliefs. From the moment that we come in the morning, we're looking for ways to innovate. So just what are those beliefs? And then again, the next step, what are the positive, vital change behaviors that you need to do that? And those will be things like, you know, having stand-up meetings where you can ask the CEO anything, you can challenge him on anything, ask him why he's not innovating in a certain way, or she, or things like just challenging the status quo all the time. Do you have space all the time to challenge the status quo? So just a very easy example, go from what won't serve us anymore, what do we want to create, what beliefs do we want to create in people's minds, and then what behaviors do we need to support that? And the part, Robert, that most organizations get wrong is they then don't reward and recognize the right behaviors. So when someone starts to have those right behaviors, it's to celebrate it, to say, that's great, you went on the journey with us, we can really see you starting to innovate. Rewarding it and recognizing it on stage, the way we communicate to people, whatever it is in organizations, and then of course making sure that our reward mechanisms reward those behaviors, that we're measuring people on those behaviors. And that's just an example of innovation. And I think we have to do that for every single value. You know, the one that always gets to me is customer centricity. We want to be so customer centric, the customer's at the heart of everything. And then we have KPIs that measure how long are we on a phone call in the customer service center. That's not putting the customer at the heart of anything. So that would be one of those behaviors that you immediately throw away. So
no, thank you, Talita. Thank you. There's a comment from Jean. Jean, would you come in and ask your question, or just raise your comment?
Yes, thank you, Robert. Hi, Talita.
hi, Jean.
Very interesting as ever, thought-provoking. Recently, we've seen a lot of activity in the launch in Wales in particular of the TOMS framework, which is the societal value add. And given that it took many businesses eons to get to grips with CSR, et cetera, do you think that directors take this new TOMS ESG responsibility seriously, or do you believe there is opportunity for growth there?
I think it's still lip service. It's still, if we just look at a B Corp organization, so those are the organizations that have the very rigorous process to measure their impact on society and environment. They measure it from the moment they start the supply chain to maybe giving at the end to charity. What I see in many organizations, we give at the end to charity. That's kind of, and then we think we're doing it. We don't go back and analyze the entire supply chain from the beginning of when we're starting production or creating products and services, whatever it is, and then measuring it every step. Are we really doing it in an environmentally friendly, socially friendly way? Personally, I think it's a tick box exercise still at the moment. And I think it will start to change with the ESG reporting. And I think from January, and I think the other thing, you know, BlackRock's CEO saying that, you know, it's almost like his personal duty to start looking at environmental and social governance when they're investing, and they're the biggest investor in the world. Mm. I think that's going to focus a few minds, to be honest.
Thank you.
You know, if you can't get funding, you're in a bit of a problem. So I think that trend will change within the 5 to 8 years. I think that's going to change tremendously.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Thank you, Talita. Muir has a question. Muir, would you like to come in?
Hi, Talita, everyone. Thanks for whetting our appetites so wonderfully, Talita. You mentioned at the outset that you like working with younger directors and bringing them on, and I just wondered if you wanted to share with us how you see, if you like, contemporary generations X, Y, Z. What are their leadership traits by comparison to people like me who are a bit pale, male, stale, and in our 60s?
I want to use an example because it's the example that kind of like was really in my face. So I led a group of directors still in Pall Mall through the leadership module. And we had one youngish guy in the room. I don't want to make it about age, but he was, compared to the rest of the group, relatively in a different age group. And he was the union appointed representative in the room. So he wasn't a normal board member. He's not gone through all that rigorous approach to the top. He was quite destructive in the beginning because, of course, he hasn't gone through all that learning that a board director has gone through. So what is the role of HR? He was challenging that HR is the one who develops the leaders. And, so he had some fundamental issues in his understanding. So I think there's that part always with it. And I don't want to base it on just this one person. But I want to tell you what he did and what he did really, really well. We then ran a crisis, we run like a little crisis case study where you're a company and the whole board is in crisis and you have to address the media and report to the media on this crisis. He is the best, of course he had input from his group, but he was the best, the most natural that I had ever seen do that. And it was because of his connection to the customer and his connection to himself and to empathy. So for him, because he'd been working in customer services, he knew the most important thing is to have that rapport, that emotional intelligence, that empathy. So I'd seen him have hardly any other emotional intelligence within the 2 days, but with that activity, he brought it all to life. And I always now say to people, ask people who are touching and feeling the customer what you should say, because they are so close to it and they have such a different way of articulating it that I got goosebumps when he stood up and he represented his group. And so it's just an example for me. I think if you've grown up in command and control, and I've grown up in very big automotive, male-dominated organizations, not that that ever mattered to me, but it's just that whole command and control, this is how it is, I'm the boss. If you've grown up in that, I think we have a certain way. We also want to control things. We're afraid of losing control. We're afraid of not knowing the answers, whatever it is. He just didn't have any of that. He was just so himself. And so I think that the biggest difference is they just are who they are. I'll give you another example that's really, really relevant. In one organization, we were implementing authenticity as a value. And we did it, we were a little bit cheeky because I thought it would make a difference. So we split the working groups into generational differences, exactly X, Y, and Z. The Gen Xers, so my generation and the generation beyond, they wanted to know, give me the checklist. Tell me what I need to do, and then I'll be authentic for you and I'll tick it off. And the younger generation just said, but we are. We just are authentic. We don't really understand what you want from us because we're being who we are. And so that just brought it to, it's very different. I think the mindset and the where they start from is really different. So I think there's a lot that we as boards can learn just from who they touch, who they feel, how they are.
I think Glenn's point, thanks Muir very much. Glenn's point, it's all about observing how individuals build credibility and following with others and see the behaviors and traits that come through. And then Jean adds an interesting case study that you just mentioned, Talita. If we could switch that to consider your thoughts on the appointment of employees to their respective boards, what are the key leadership responsibilities in embracing their position on the board and helping them to become part of the team? Some observations and a quick question there for Jean.
So if I get the question right, it's really asking me, what do I think those responsibilities are that we need to get within the younger generation? Is that right?
Is that right, Jean? That's where you're coming from, isn't it?
It's both. It's that, but it's also the move to bring employees off the shop floor, as it were, onto the board, and how you think leaders on the board, whether it's the chair or whether it's members of the board themselves, their peer group, how they embrace and accept their responsibilities for bringing that individual without all of the skills that you've just talked about and the experience to sit with them.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. What I've seen is that bringing on one person can be really difficult. Some companies are creating a younger shadow board. So they get the same papers, they look at things, and then they discuss with the board how they see that. And I find that that's more palatable and more inclusive because it's more about a group. It's not just about one individual. And so I think the inclusiveness is easier there. you really need a different mindset in the boardroom, because if people have been chairs and they've been chairs for a long time and they've been board directors for a long time, some of them are not very self-aware and they're not so willing to do it differently. And then it's really, really difficult. I see with those boards, Jean, just bringing one person on, they're almost like the ostracized one. And you need a really strong chair then to manage that. So I think the idea of a group of younger directors that are kind of they're informing the board of how they would have seen the decision, what they would have thought, and you're almost kind of looking at it from a different perspective is the way that I see some forward-thinking companies doing that, because then the safety is also in the numbers.
Thanks for that, Jean. Thanks, Talita. I'm going to come to Marina very shortly with your question. But before I do, I'm just going to read out Linda's point. Young people will drive the change that needs to happen, re-ESG. And a very quick question. Are MBA programs changing quickly enough to embrace a new capitalism? The IoD changes quick enough, doesn't it?
I'm very fortunate to be part of a network of global responsible leaders. So BMW has a von Kuhnheim trust that really uses a group of young, well, they're not young, they're all ages really, but in different impact environments. So you get charities in there, you get people who are driving impact businesses and all sorts of things like that. And I think for me, what's important in that network is to see how differently people really think who are living and breathing within that environment. And so I think what's really important is to kind of blend probably how some corporates think with that if we really want to drive ESG appropriately. I think it's about new partnerships. It's about us in current existing boards partnering with maybe some impact organizations and understanding how they think, how they breathe, how they DNA. And I've learned quite a lot just with a couple of interactions from that group about how differently they just see the world. And there's a lot of environmental specialists in there. Now, of course, they scare you to death, because they tell us we're headed for one very big disaster in terms of climate risk and food shortages and all sorts of things like that. So sometimes it's good and bad to be in a network like that. But the good thing is that I see the differences, how they think. And as board directors, I think we have a very far way to go still. And therefore, I think if you don't have something like that informing an MBA or a course that you're doing, I think you will never get the latest thinking. They just think so differently as a collective group.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that point, and thanks, Talita. Marina has a question. Marina, do you want to pose your question?
Yeah, hello. Basically, I just wondered, well, this will be the first year of me working on my business full time. Previous to that, I had a job. I had about a 40-hour job a week plus the business, and it started trading June 2017. So I'm still kind of learning to become a director. There are 2 male shareholders in the business, and I have 2 female staff. And I do sometimes feel, so I'm in my 30s, and I've struggled like in the past with kind of low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and so on. But I am getting a lot of insight into myself. I just wanted to know like how you deal with that imposter syndrome that women sometimes get, and what kind of techniques and tactics you kind of use to get over that, because I know that's really, really imperative in leadership and self-understanding.
So one top tip that I have is intention. So I think one of the fields that's immensely important now is the neuroscience. And we all have, I just want to share something. I sit on big boards and have my entire life, but sometimes I also think that maybe I'm not good enough on that board. So I think imposter syndrome and that thinking, that critical thinking that we have is something that's absolutely normal. You know, we're all very much DNA to be a lot harder on ourselves. It's just how we are. So sometimes when I apply for boards and other people who have more experience get it, I also think, well, am I not a very good board director? But I get very good feedback on the board that I am. So it's all just the head nonsense. And so I think the thing is the intention. So ever since I've been working with intention more, it makes a huge difference. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So I'll just use another example. If my feet hit the floor every morning when I get out of bed, and I'm already starting to worry about the day and worry about what I didn't do yesterday and what's on my plate today, the intention that I'm setting for myself is anxiety and stress, because I'm already starting with my mind, and my mind races 1,000 miles a minute. But when I get up and I breathe a little bit more before I get up, and I maybe lie in the bed and think, how would I like my day to be today? And I say, I'm going to be in control of my day today. I'm going to have an amazing day. I'm going to work through that list of things that I need to do. And every interaction that I'm going to have, I'm going to have it in a way where I feel I'm in control. I'm in my power. You know, these are the words you need for your mind. I'm in my power. I'm in control. I feel grounded. And I set that intention before my feet hit the floor. New way of thinking. And then while I'm going, you know, when it's in the shower or wherever, or getting dressed, using whatever, you know, is happening to you in that moment, when you're brushing your teeth, maybe going, I can do this. Today I'm going to be really great at what I'm doing. It's all about intention setting for the day. It's a tip that I learned from a coach. I had one of the CEOs that was extremely challenging that I worked for. And I would always get like in a stress before I went into a meeting with him. And my coach said, why don't you write out on a piece of paper how you want that meeting to be? And it did wonders, because I would write that I want to be open to his ideas. I want to be grounded. I want to feel like I'm confident. And I would literally write it down, because he would always come with stories of, why did you do that? We didn't do that in America. You know, America, far bigger market than the UK. You kind of like, in my head, all I received were, you're so stupid. You're running the company into the ground because you're not like doing it like in America. And the reality was, the minute that I started to write down how I wanted it to be, I went to meetings with an energy, with a different set of energy. So I didn't go with that cowering energy where he's going to kind of attack me. I went with the type of energy that I'm going to be calm, collected, open to his ideas, and we're going to get on brilliantly. And honestly, it worked 95% of the time. So, you know, I'll go for the 5% where it still didn't go well.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Marina. Great question, as Mia has said in the chat. Thank you very much for that. Time is moving really fast. We could probably talk all day, Talita, and it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to hear your thoughts. I wondered if we might sort of just, in the final few minutes, just get your view on what makes a great leader. And I know you alluded to the Global Leadership Hypothesis series that you've been interviewing great leaders, and a number of them. What's the standouts for you?
So I started to do it to try and understand, is there a red thread? Do people gravitate to leaders who do a certain thing? And there are definitely 4 things. Out of the 27 interviews that I've done, different board directors, different levels, it's the same. It's someone who has a vision, who has purpose, and who gives direction. Very clear. People call it different names, but that's the first thing. The second thing is the ability to take people with you. To take people with you, to inspire people, to grow those people, to develop those people. That's the second. The third thing is what I would call traditionally what we don't spend a lot of time on, being vulnerable, having empathy. All of those things are coming to the forefront immensely. We need to have empathy for others. We need to be able to put ourselves in their shoes as leaders. We need to know when to be vulnerable. And we need to know when to just go with the flow instead of trying to control. And the last one is role modeling. And I was surprised by how important role modeling is. So a leader really, and it's not just walking the talk, it's kind of living what you're asking people to do. So if you're saying people is important, then making sure that every decision that you're making is doing that. And if it's not, explaining to people why. Because sometimes people just need to understand why. Why is that different to what you're saying to me? So,
and of all those who you interviewed, who were the standouts, or is that a bit unfair to say?
It's a bit unfair to say. I'll say a couple that were very senior that really stood out for me. So Hiltrud Werner is the main board director of Volkswagen for legal affairs and integrity. And we all know what Volkswagen has gone through with the diesel scandal. she took that job knowing that. And she spoke about why she took the job. And she said, I wanted to give I can't remember the exact number she mentioned, but all those thousands of people who felt like they were affected by this, she wanted to give them a chance to kind of improve their situation. So really amazing interview from her. Sir David Walker, who immediately turned it around. It's not about great leadership. It's all about good and great followers. I mean, standout comment from him. Who else? Zara Baralumi, a director for Accenture Technology. Her comment that really stood out for me was something like, she wants the team to support each other. So when people join her team, she'll say to them, this is the no-nonsense team. There's no politics in this team. And what we're here to do is support each other. And she disarms them and tells them, you're here to be yourself. And that was just like also super, super standout comment from her side. There was a Swiss banker that I absolutely disagree with. He's the chair of a Swiss bank. He said, great leaders can't be developed. And he said, we'll always disagree about this. And I said, yes, we'll always disagree about that. I do believe we can develop. So yes, some absolutely fabulous people that I interviewed, and they're all available. So if you look Global Leadership Hypothesis, you'll find all the interviews. They're roughly 30 to 40 minutes each. And then I've created a little trailer of each. So and I asked them all the same questions. What makes a great leader? Where should the leader start? How important is the interaction with the team? What holds the leader back? So that I could get a bit of a flavor.
Talita, thank you so much. I think that's a super point for us to leave on in terms of leadership. Leaders can be developed, and the opportunities and what you've outlined today to us will be hugely thought-provoking, and we have already learned a lot from it. So we very much appreciate you taking the time to be with us today in our celebration of all things learning, and it's a great thrill to have you with us. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you will wish to demonstrate your appreciation.
Thank you,
I'm going to thank you so much, and we do hope that we have the opportunity of seeing you face to face sometime, hopefully next year, when we will be running our professional development courses in the International Convention Centre just outside Newport, which is a pretty midway between the Southwest and Wales. So there'll be an opportunity for members and others to be able to join those courses then, and more details will be communicated in due course. I'm going to pause very briefly for 5 minutes so people can have an opportunity for a short leg stretch or a cup of coffee. We'll be starting again at 1 o'clock, when we'll be welcoming Deborah Benson to discuss strategy. So we see Deborah already on screen. We're looking forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much once again, Talita, and see you all back here in a few minutes. We've had such a feast already, and now we continue with that in that same vein. And we're delighted to welcome Deborah Benson, who is again one of our leading tutors on the IoD courses. We've been very fortunate today to have world-class presentations from world-class tutors, and we're very, very grateful to them for giving their time. The presentation that Deborah will be looking at is, as you see on the screen, a strategy for directors. One of the things, obviously, that underpins everything that directors have to contend with. So the format for this afternoon's final session, for those who are just joining us, is that Deborah will give a presentation for about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, followed by a Q&A session. It's like our previous presentations, enormously difficult to get all of the information that we can in an hour, but we've seemed to manage it so far, and I've no doubt that our presentation from Deborah will be equally as impressive and comprehensive, and sharing with us some of the key elements. So Deborah, you're very welcome, and perhaps if I can hand over to you to give a brief overview and then carry on with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you for welcoming me. First of all, delighted to have heard my two previous colleagues. Fantastic, such interesting content. I wasn't able to hear all of John's, but I heard most of Talita's. And Talita, some of the stuff you were saying, particularly around emotional intelligence, is just so important to leadership. It was wonderful to hear. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about strategy for directors, which is one of the 4 certificate modules on the IoD program. This is me. I'm at one of those ages, as you can tell from the grey hair. I never know what to put on this sort of slide. But from an IoD perspective, I'm the program lead for leadership and a course leader for strategy. And I also get involved in quite a few of the shorter director series, the CPD programs. My background, well, I started off in advertising and marketing in London. I worked in ad agencies, and then I went client side and became a marketing manager, and then UK sales and marketing director in residential development. The directorship was a really interesting one from a leadership perspective, because first of all, it was in Scotland. And as you can tell, I am very English. I grew up on the South Coast. And secondly, I joined a huge construction group in Scotland, where I was their youngest ever director and their first female director. So when one of your attendees today was talking about that sort of imposter syndrome and, you know, that whole thing about how do you own a room, I had that experience big time. I joined an organization which had thousands of employees, and there I was as the first woman. So it's a really fascinating and really interesting experience. For my great sins, and goodness knows why they did it, they decided to make me managing director, which was an even bigger shock for the industry, because a female director was one thing, but a woman actually running a construction and development company was a whole new thing for them. And I was only in my mid-30s, so it was an amazing experience. I ran 2 organizations for the Miller Group, one in what's called affordable housing these days. Back in the day, we called it partnership housing. And then I ran a combined business, which was partnership housing and mainstream residential development. And after quite a few years doing that, I got headhunted by another UK house builder, and I moved across to become MD for Scotland of one of their operations. When I'd had enough of the big corporate world, I decided to go out on my own, set up my own businesses. I have run businesses in property development, which was an amazing experience, I have to say. I have also acquired and I run a farm, so I work in agriculture. I've worked as a consultant, and more recently, I went back to university. I had an MBA and I decided I wanted to sort of shake up my brain again and do something a bit different. So about 8 years ago, I went back to university and did a doctorate in business. And I focused very much on leadership and strategy, which are kind of 2 of my main passions in the business world. I think it'd be fair to say I'm not a great finance person. I can follow the money in the businesses I run, but I would certainly never ever be able to compete with Talita when it comes to being an FD. I'm not a numbers person in that sense of the word. But I really wanted to go back. I wanted to kickstart my brain again, do something different. And I wanted to move into training and development, because I found as I went through my career that one of the things that really set the heather light for me most of all was working with people, growing people, and helping them to understand their business so that they could be more strategic in the delivery of the business. So I went in that direction. I set up my own training and development business about 5 years ago, probably more than that now, actually time flies, probably about 7 years ago. And since then, I have been doing development, workshops, training, mentoring, and coaching for individuals and for organizations, primarily organizations. I occasionally pick up mentoring work on the back of working with organizations, with the focus being very much on leadership so that I can help people to drive their business forward, but also strategy so that we can look at where that business needs to go and how as directors we can help it to get there. So the training and development is the greater part of my current career, and the Institute of Directors are my biggest and most wonderful client. We do incredible work with the Institute of Directors, and we have the huge privilege of working with roomfuls of directors from many different industries, many different sectors. And I always argue that one of the best things about the IoD courses is not just the course leaders, and we have some amazing colleagues who deliver courses, but it is also what you learn from the other directors in your cohort. We learn very much from each other. We do still as the course leaders, everybody as much as the delegates do. And it creates a huge networking platform. I think there is nothing more healthy than to talk to directors from a different sector to your own, from a different industry to your own, because they just have ideas and initiatives that you've never come across in your industry. So it's amazing work to do. It's a huge privilege. The other thing I'm doing at the moment is I'm launching an organization called the Directors Convention. And this is a virtual learning platform, but it's very much peer-to-peer learning for directors. And we have specific themes at each live convention. And we will have an expert speaker who will do a little bit of kind of training and development with all of the delegates. But the greater part of the conventions, which last over 3 sessions across one day, the greatest part is the peer-to-peer work. So, for example, we ran our first one, which was on digital transformation. We had an expert speaker, Steve, who came in and told us what it was all about from the leader's perspective. So it wasn't for techies, it was very much for directors, so that we could better brief the techies when they come into our organizations. And then the directors worked together looking at how they could create a route map for digital transformation for their organization. So that really builds on my passion of directors helping with leadership and strategy, and also peer-to-peer learning, which I think is so powerful. I've been a executive director for over 20 years. I'm not going to admit how many years, but it's over 20. And I've also been a non-exec director for over 20 years. Again, working across all sectors, worked on charity boards, diverse industries, public sector boards, arm's length public sector boards, all kind of interesting things. I've even worked on an advisory board for theatre, which was really fascinating. And it was one of the examples where strategy really matters and information really matters, because we were put together to help them with the redesign and the rebuilding of their theatre. And it's quite a famous theatre up in Scotland. And we were looking at all these wonderful plans for the new theatre. And of course, there was the theatre space itself, there was new workshop space, there was storage for equipment. They had a very big restaurant. They had outside external space. And I was sitting there on this board and I said, can I ask a question? And I said, where do you make your money? And they looked at me rather blank. And I said, well, which bit of your operations makes money? You have the external sort of features, which you charge for. You have a restaurant, you have a gift shop, you have the theatre itself. Where does your profit margin come from? And they didn't have a clue. I mean, I found that shocking. If you have a diverse business, I may not be a finance person, but you really need to know where you're making money and where you're losing it. So they were designing this huge restaurant and I was saying, do you make any money out of restaurants? And they couldn't tell me. So one of the things for me is strategy is we have to have information. So that's me. Let's have a look at strategy. People often tell me that strategy is a game of chess. It is about how you move those markers on the board of your organization, what you do with the different business units. And I've got a confession to make. Chess bores me rigid. I've tried really hard over the years to get into chess. My partner now, my husband, loves chess. He plays chess online with my stepson every weekend. My stepson's in New York. I just can't get excited by chess, but believe me, I get really, really excited by strategy. And I get the analogy. So here's a chess that I can get a little bit more excited about. You may recognize some of the New York buildings there, the Angle Isle building, Sears building, and so forth. This, I think, is a chess set that has much more resonance with strategy because it reminds us that strategy is about money, it is about power, it is about success, it is about making the right moves for your organization. So strategy is kind of a bit about like chess, but for me, way, way more exciting and way more challenging. And in chess, you can learn standard moves. Very hard to do that in the real world, isn't it? So my colleagues talked about vision and purpose, and I cannot talk to you about strategy without talking about vision and purpose. If you don't have a really clear vision of the exciting future that you want to take your business to, please don't start thinking about strategy, because you have to understand what the end goal is. You have to know where you want to take that business. And this is a really beautiful example for me of purpose. It's an organization I heard about from India. And there was a doctor whose name I can't begin to pronounce. I'm not going to try. But he recognized that many people in India were going blind for the want of a very, very simple and actually surprisingly cheap eye operation. But he also recognized that, you know, India, it's a huge country and there are huge, huge problems of poverty. And there are many people who cannot afford medicine of any kind, least of all an eye operation. So he got together with some other doctors and they set up their first hospital. It had 11 beds and they brought their own furniture from their own homes to furnish that hospital because he had this overwhelming vision. He wanted to eliminate needless blindness. There's his vision statement from his current website. Interesting enough, those words are blurred on his website, and I'm pretty sure they do that on purpose, just to remind us what it's like when we don't have clear vision. So he had this really, really strong purpose. He wanted to do eye operations for people with no money. But it's more than that, because it's not just what do we do that is the purpose of our organization, but is why is it meaningful? And for him, he wasn't just saving poor people's eyesight. What he was doing was he was ensuring that poor people could keep earning their living. Because if you go blind and you're living in poverty in India, you might be the only wage earner in your family. Your family will become homeless. Your family will not be able to feed themselves. So his purpose was way, way more than just the eye operations. And they have a wonderful system whereby for every paid eye operation, they do 2 for free. And they now have a network of hospitals across India. So I wanted to think, whenever you talk about strategy, first of all, talk about vision and purpose and also values. What are the values that underpin what you want to do with your business, where you want to take it, and how you want it to grow? So vision, purpose, and indeed values. Something else I'd like to share with you, and don't get too hung up about the detail of this, we're just going to talk about some of the issues. But this is some research we've put together with delegates who've come on the strategy module at the IoD. And you can see along the bottom, there's lots of different elements of strategic thinking that we ask people about. And in very broad terms, if there's a long green line, that means the delegates felt their companies or their organizations were very strong in that area. If it's red, it was a low score. So let's have a look at that in terms of purpose. The first thing I'm delighted with, as you can see, many of the delegates who filled in the survey for us told us that their company had a really compelling purpose that guided their strategic thinking. Fantastic. I mean, that's how it should be, isn't it? Slightly more worryingly, there was a whole bunch, not so many, but still a significant number, who actually felt their organization had no compelling purpose or vision when they looked at strategy. That is really concerning, isn't it? I want to pick out a few of the other things. Isn't this worrying? See those 3 there? Many of the delegates said, you know what, we don't take the time to review our strategic assumptions. The assumptions we made when we drew up our strategy for our business, you know, we kind of set them at the beginning of the year or the 3 years, and we don't actually stop and say, are those assumptions still valid? How dangerous is that? A lot of them say, well, I'm not really sure we've got the right people even involved in deciding what our strategy is. Pretty scary too, isn't it? And I think even more worrying was a whole bunch said their organizations were not clear about their risk appetite. Now, risk is a huge part of every module we do on the IoD because it's so important for business. And boy, are we finding out about risk and crisis at the moment in the middle of COVID. But again, you shouldn't enter into your strategic decision-making until you've decided, what is the risk appetite of our organization? What risks can we mitigate? How much risk can our organization tolerate? So these are really important things. And if we jump to the right-hand side, this is even more worrying, I think. A large number of delegates thought that their organization was not actually aligned to deliver the strategy. And when you look at research on why rollout fails, it's nearly always a lack of alignment. And what do we mean by alignment? We mean lots of things, but one of the huge things for me is that you don't just do strategy in the C-suite. Every element of your business has to be aligned with a strategy you're trying to roll out for your organization. So you don't just have a strategy for the business, but you need to look at every bit of that business. So you need a marketing strategy, a finance strategy, an HR strategy. You have to cascade the grand overarching strategy throughout your organization. And that means you have to make sure you have the right people in the right place doing the right things at the right time if you want your strategy to deliver. So that lack of alignment is very worrying. And the other one that made me jump when I looked at this research was they felt that organizations had no capacity to deal with unforeseen events. You know, there's a lot we can say about strategy, but one of the things we have to accept is that things will come in from left field and they will change our world so that our strategy that we thought was marvelous and was going swimmingly may have to change. So why is it that these highly experienced directors who are coming on these IoD courses, when they sat back and looked at their own organizations and looked at the strategic approach their organizations took, it was lacking in many areas? And I think one of the things that I have found sitting on boards is, and I ask delegates this, I always say, which of the models we use do you recognize? Which one do you definitely use at board? And this one is the one that always pops up. I'm sure you've come across it. Good old SWOT analysis. So looking at what are the strengths of our organizations? You know, what in this organization is powerful? What are we good at? Where are we really competitive? Flip side of that, of course, the weaknesses is what are we weak in? You know, maybe we don't have the capacity we need for the strategy we'd really like to roll out. Maybe the culture's wrong. My colleagues have talked about culture. I'm pretty sure I heard Jean say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It absolutely does. Actually, culture eats most things for breakfast if we don't get the culture right. So we might have a fantastic strategy, but our culture is such a weakness that it destroys our strategy. So strengths and weaknesses, opportunities is the ability to see what's out there in the big wide world that we can exploit. What can we do? What can we do differently? What are the opportunities that we are fit to take on board? And threats, you know, what's happening out there that can come and bite us, that can get in the way of our strategy, that can change our thinking. So SWOT analysis is great, isn't it? It has its real role in strategic analysis. My problem with it is it looks easy, so boards often focus on it. And my bigger problem is boards often do that without really thorough strategic analysis and robust data. I don't know about you, but I've sat on boards where the strategy was driven by the strongest voice around that boardroom table, who might have been the chief exec or the chair. And for me, that is not how strategy should be done. So one of the things we say on the course is SWOT should come at the end of your analysis. It should not be the starting point. Because if SWOT is just based on the opinions around the boardroom table, it's a really weak tool. If it's based on robust data, robust analysis, and at the end of it, you come to your SWOT, it's really powerful. So I love the fact that boards use it. I hate the fact that they do it based on opinion quite often, not based on really, really strong data. So if I had to say, what is the one thing we try and do on the strategy course? It is to enable you as directors to have more robust discussion and debate around your boardroom table. So the strategy you come up with genuinely is powerful and meaningful for your business. And it's not based on whims, it's not based on desires. I'll share with you later an example of a strategy that was horribly wrong because it was based on a very, very dominant board member. So here's the 4 sections that we run for strategy. We start off looking at strategy in the board itself. So what is the role of the board? What are our responsibilities as directors? We then go on to talk about strategic analysis. So we talk about what sort of data should we collate? Where can we source it? What will help us in our strategic thinking? and we talk about the macro and the micro scale. What is happening in our marketplace? What are the big issues facing our organization? What are the small things we have to consider in our organization? We talk about internal and external environments. So one of the things we talk about, as indeed we do to a degree in leadership, is capacity, because it's no good coming up with an amazing strategy for your business if you can't raise the finance to roll it out, or if your culture is wrong, as I said earlier, or if you just don't have the skills base in your organization. So we look at those sort of issues and say, how do we make a strategy for our organization that we know we can deliver on? And we look at some of the academic tools that are given us to help us analyze that. Although I've done a degree, Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science, and I've done an MBA and I've done a doctorate, believe me, all of these wonderful academic tools are great in theory, but we have to put the meat on the bones. They're much better in practice. We then go on to look at strategic choice. So we say we've studied the environment, we've looked at and identified options. We now have to decide which options do we run with. So we look at, well, how do we create these options, give ourselves choice, and then how do we evaluate them? How do we go through an exercise of saying, this one feels better, but is that just our gut feel because it's our comfort zone? Or can we support it with data and analysis, that is actually the stronger route to go in? You talked about what delegates get out of courses. I was running the strategy program on one of our accelerated courses, where all the courses are run in 1 week. And I was working with a very mixed group. We had people from car dealerships, we had people from IT, we had a gentleman who was an investment banker, he was an investor. And we were talking about how you evaluate the different options. And he had one of those aha moments. And he said, oh my goodness, Deborah, he said, I spend my life looking at business proposals for us to invest in businesses. And he said, do you know what we've never done is we've never sat all of those options next to each other and compared and contrasted them. We always look at them in glorious isolation. He said, we've never actually just done a simple spreadsheet and said, what are the merits of this one compared to the merits of this one, to decide where to put our money? Isn't that fascinating? So we do all that analysis, then we look at, well, how do we select the options? What helps us to make those choices? And then we wrap up the course by looking at strategy implementation. Because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't roll it out, as I said earlier, if your organization isn't aligned to be able to deliver the strategy, then your strategy will fail. I often talk about, have we got everyone rowing the boat in the same direction? And often that's why that vision and passion, that sense of purpose at the beginning are so important. Because if we can't give people what we're trying to achieve with a strategy, you'll find they often start rowing the boat in different directions. And that's when strategies can go sadly awry. So one of the things we try and look at and we talk about is, what is your strategic space for your organization? And I often think of that as, what is your room to maneuver as an organization? And that is impacted upon by the resources and the capabilities that your organization has, the organizational focus and purpose. Some organizations, they like to be quite diverse. Particularly, you know, if you look at some of the big investment funds who buy companies, you know, Hathaways, you know, people like that, they will acquire companies in all sorts of diverse sectors. And that is their choice. That is the way they choose to operate. You know, it's Warren Buffett and his colleagues. They have some lovely comments. Warren Buffett is one of the biggest and most successful investors in the world. He always says, only invest in a company that can be run by idiots, because sooner or later it will be. And he also says, another of my favorites, Warren Buffett, is, you can only tell who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. And what he means by that is, you can look like you've got a great strategy and you're making lots of money, or if you're in the not-for-profit sector, you're serving lots of users, service users, lots of clients. But when the crisis hits, as COVID has done, that's when you find out who's really not running a robust organization. and who's perhaps not quick on their feet. You may find that your focus is forced on you by a parent company. You may have a parent company that says, no, we don't want you going in that direction. It may be a market opportunity. It's not where we want you to go. So that can limit your space. And then, of course, the third side of that triangle is what's happening externally. It's what is happening in your environment and what are the opportunities that you can grasp. And so your strategic fit is how can you fit your strategy within those limitations? And you might be lucky, you may have a very expansive strategic space. Think of organizations, you know, the big Japanese conglomerates like Toyota and Hyundai. You know, we often think of them for cars because that's what we buy from them. But when you actually look at their organizations, they have multiple different businesses under the one umbrella. So their strategic space is massive. If you're a charity, particularly if you have one main funder, or you're a business with very, very controlling shareholders, you may find that your focus is forced upon you by them and your strategic space is actually very small. So we try and look at what is the strategic fit for the space that we are facing. And this is a slightly scary model, but actually by the end of the course, you'll love it. So what we do is we say, how do we look at the challenge that we are facing as directors for the business? So we talk about the vision and the values, stakeholders and their expectations, because it's no good having a strategy that doesn't appeal to your stakeholders. You're dead in the water. We talk about the macro and the micro environment, and all this model does is it just reminds us which tools we can use. So when we're looking at the macro environment, for example, we talk about models like PESTLE. You may have heard of PESTLE. So we say, what's happening in the political environment? What's happening in the economy? What's happening socially that might impact on our business? You know, I used to be a house builder. Well, increasing levels of divorce and decreasing family sizes changed the mix of houses we wanted to build on our housing sites. Technology. I mean, technology has had such an impact on so many businesses. Is there anything in the legal environment, the regulatory environment, for example? And the environmental side. What is happening with the environment? Now that hits us strategically from a couple of points of view, doesn't it? What can we do to be a greener organization? Can we use less energy? Can we get rid of, you know, polluting technologies when there are newer technologies we could be using? But also, what might the environment be doing to us? You know, if you're a property developer, you have to look at, are your buildings resilient? There's a lovely example of one of the Irish banks. I won't tell you which one, but one of the Irish banks decided to move their main data center to India. You know, classic example of outsourcing and offshoring. So they took their main data center to India, where they could get, you know, huge access to highly trained, incredibly intelligent, relatively cheap staff. And they also created a huge data backup center, so that if anything went wrong with their first data center, everything was backed up, none of their client information was lost, and so forth. However, they built both data centers on the same fault line. So a tectonic plates, where two plates were meeting, they built both of their data centers on their same fault line. Not a very good strategy, one would say, in environmental terms. And indeed, the Irish regulator gave them 4 days to remove one of the data centers and open it in Ireland. 4 days, can you imagine? So PESTLE is a very simple tool, but of course, if you have good data, it becomes incredibly powerful. We look at things like scenario planning, the S-curve, which is different life stages that markets and businesses go through, market segmentation, who are we targeting? Therefore, what does our product have to be like? 5 forces, strategy clock, VRIN, value chain. We look through all of these, and then we go on to say, well, how do we pull all of that together? So we look at things like the business horizons. Are we in horizon 1 or 2 or 3? The ANSOF matrix, where we look at, should we do a new product or service? Should we move into a new market? Should we do both? Those sort of things. We look at how we can evaluate, and then we come around to the commitment side of it. So that's where we talk about how do we get our organization ready to deliver the strategy we've come up with? What are the big implementation issues? And how do we measure it and review it? Do you remember I said that a lot of our delegates said they don't actually review the assumptions that they make at the start of their strategy? So don't panic when you see this. It looks really complicated. It's not something you get examined on. It is a tool to help you know when to use which model to do what. And we build up that knowledge as you go through the course. So by the end of the course, you look at that model and think, yeah, that is great. That is easy. And it's a super little aid memoir. So as I move towards the end, I wanted to talk to you about agile strategy. It's an area we're building on the course. And agile strategy is a really interesting issue. I got some quotes from the military in particular and from wartime. Strategy is rendered redundant by the first engagement with the enemy. I run a lot of courses through the IoD for officers leaving the military. Nothing like teaching officers about leadership and strategy, is there? I mean, they've been studying it since they were probably 16 years old. I was actually running one of the leadership modules and I had a 4-star general from Joint Chief Command in the room. And he still enjoyed the course. It tells you how good the IoD courses are. So what this reminds us, and what the other two quotes remind us, is that you can have the best strategy you've ever come up with for your organization, and something changes in the outside environment typically. And when that happens, or when a competitor makes a major move or something like that, you have to be able to change your strategy in a heartbeat. Very famous general said, the sign of a good leader is they know when to ditch the plan. So all of that hard work we put into our strategy, and guess what? We then have to be quick on our feet as well. And if you think of COVID, it is an absolutely classic example. Think how much you have changed your businesses to survive because of COVID in ways that previously you'd have probably taken 3 years to roll out. You have changed in days. And that is the key to being agile. And I'll give you a couple of examples of it. I had one delegate who, as I said, ran a car dealership. And I asked him the question, do you think you are agile as an organization? And he said, oh, I think we're incredibly agile. We have really, really agile strategy, very agile organization. And I said, okay, let's just think that through a little bit. So I said, you've got a dealership. Yeah, you've got a dealership. So you've got bricks and mortar, you've got your site. I said, what if someone opens up one of those big multiple dealership sites, you know, on the other side of town, and you realize that you have to be there because all the competitors are there. If you're not there, you are missing the main customer base. How long does it take you to negotiate a deal to get into that new dealership zone? And what's the lease like where you're sitting now? How quickly can you get out of that lease? And he went, oh yeah, that's true. That's. I said, okay. And I said, you know, what cars do you sell? And I think from memory, I'll say BMW. We'll say it was BMW. And I said, who sets the pricing strategy for the cars that you sell? Well, BMW does. Yeah. So, okay. So you can see how we might think we're agile because we as individuals are agile, but our businesses might not be. And so one of the things we have to do as directors when we're thinking about strategy is think, how do we make us agile? How do we make sure that when the crisis hits, we can move with it? And as Churchill and Eisenhower said, in their different ways, plans are a little important, but the planning is essential. Planning is everything. So the hard work we do for our strategy means that when we do have to be agile, usually at short notice, we are much better placed to deal with that change and to choose the right change because we've thought through options well, we've got data, we've got information, we understand our businesses better from a strategic point of view. So let me give you my favorite quote for strategy. And this comes from Johnson, Whittington and Scholes. Johnson and Scholes, if you like textbooks, they write the textbooks on strategy for MBAs. Heavy reading, very academic, but very, very strong. And I love this quote. Strategy is the direction and scope of an organization over the longer term, which achieves advantage in a changing environment through its configuration of resources and competencies with the aim of fulfilling stakeholder expectations. That's a long quote, isn't it? But it really covers so much of strategy in one question. So it's the direction and scope. So it's the direction of travel over the longer term to achieve advantage in a changing environment through the way we configure our resources and our skills with the aim of fulfilling stakeholder expectations. Great quote, that one. So that really is strategy. Strategy is about the journey that takes your business to the purpose and vision that you want for it in the future. It is all about how do we go through that journey to get to those future ambitions. So some questions, and thank you very much for indulging me while I went through those slides. You could talk about a strategy for hours, couldn't you? So would anyone like to ask me any questions? And then I might throw a few back at you.
Deborah, thank you so much. That's so informative and gives us a real whistle-stop tour of everything that the course covers, but also that we as directors need to familiarize ourselves with. Can I ask that we revert back to the screen of just people's faces?
Yes,
in other words, if we can,
nice,
that'd be great. Yeah, so we can see
there we
it.
go.
And I know that people will want to ask questions, and please do so in the usual way in the chat mechanism, and I'll do my best to include the questions that you have and put them to Deborah. But can I perhaps first start off? I mean, it was such a comprehensive overview, Deborah. You talked about vision and purpose and values and having an end goal. And you did mention aligning it with culture. You know, sometimes the board may have this terrific wheeze about doing it a certain way, and yet everything underlying within the organization, you know, would normally tell a sensible person that, do you know what, you're just not ready for this. How would you bring the aspiration and the reality together in a practical sense?
Great question. One of the first things I think is, who do you involve in strategic thinking? And I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of thinking that is entirely the board's job and no one else's. Yeah. I'm a big fan of recognizing that the people on the coalface, you know, they might be flipping burgers and serving over a counter, they might be telesales, whatever they happen to be. They might be care workers, depends what your industry is. Those people know more about your customers than you ever will sitting on the board, because they meet them every day. They hear the gripes, they hear their compliments, they know about your customers. So I think one of the things about culture and alignment is involve your team in strategy. Don't just think it's for the highfalutin C-suite. It is for everyone in an organization to contribute to. And when I ran divisions for Miller Homes, I used to have my executive team meetings and I'd say, right, guys, these are the models I think we could use usefully this time around. Let's have a look at them. Let's see how they work. Now what I want you to do is go away and talk to your individual teams, talk to everyone, ask them the sort of questions that will help us to build these models. Find out what they say the customer wants. Find out what our staff are moaning about. What's annoying them? When are they getting frustrated? You know, where are they getting it in the ear from customers? And let's suck all of that wonderful information into the strategic process. First of all, it makes you much better informed, because if you don't understand your customers, God help you writing strategy. They're the be all and end all of our organization, whether we're a charity or a huge organization that runs globally. So if we involve people in strategy, we are more likely to develop a culture where people think strategically, they ask good critical questions. They say, why are we doing it this way? Shouldn't we do it that way? You know, they think, they share their short thoughts with you, and they are much more likely to buy into your strategy. So first of all, there's a huge element around emotional alignment, you know, getting people wanting and understanding what their role is in the strategy and feeling proud about it. And I'm a big believer in passion. Don't be in business if you can't be passionate about what you're doing. And you want to get passion in your teams. If you can get them passionate about that bright, shiny future, that vision that you're trying to take them to, you will get much better alignment of your people for the delivery of your strategy. So that's kind of the human side of it. The practical side of it is, as I said earlier, remembering that your strategy is not just one overarching program. It has to encompass every bit of your business. So it has to look at your operations, your logistics, your marketing, your HR, your money, all of these good things. And all of those have to be aligned with the overarching strategy. If they're not, you'll fail somewhere along the journey. So it is about, you know, understanding that, yes, we have an overarching strategy that the board owns and signs off on, and then shares and cascades so that everyone feels they have ownership of it. But you mustn't forget the detail. And it's not for the board to do every bit of the detail, but the executive must do the detail so that the strategy can be rolled out efficiently.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And that's a really important element of buy-in and involvement. How do you come across when some directors are on side with the strategic overview and way forward and others aren't? And how do you resolve boardroom discussions and maybe differences of agreement about where the business should go to? I mean, that's a key issue that many businesses and business leaders and directors will have faced. Yeah,
we've certainly all faced that one. I think the issue there, and some of that plays back into what Talita was saying about board dynamics. I think there's a lot of overlap between strategy and leadership, as I said. You sometimes get directors don't buy into something because it's not their area of expertise and they don't understand why it's important, or because you've got a business with different elements in it. You know, like house building, got affordable housing, you've got mainstream housing. The Miller Group that I spent a lot of my time with had mining, civil engineering, developments. So you can imagine around that board, it was quite challenging because you have these guys who were running multi-million-pound companies, paid a lot of money, and their real focus was on growing their bit of the business. And it's very hard for them to let go of that. So that's very common, that, you know, we can't let go of the fact that we're running a specific business in the group and we want that to do best. So it's very much starts with leadership. We have to have everyone understanding that as a board, we are all in it together. And we have to work for the betterment of the business as a whole, not just for our own business units. And that is something you build through good leadership over time. You can't suddenly do that. And it is very much about having a good chief exec and a good chair, and about the relationships you build around the boardroom table of mutual trust and respect. The other issue, and I think this is a really important one, and too many boards, all the sort of stuff we teach and we take directors through on the strategy module is all about using information to make well-informed decisions. The danger, and I think why many boards fracture when it comes to strategy, is it is too opinion driven. You know, it is the chief exec or the chair tries to tell everyone else what the strategy must be. And that's when you don't get buy-in, and that's when you get fracture. If you really focus your strategy on your stakeholders and on your customers, you should all find we want to go in the same direction.
Okay, and that's a really interesting point in terms of involving and engaging with stakeholders. From your experience, what are the best ways to be able to communicate a strategic overview and direction amongst a variety of different stakeholders, including employees, including externals, including maybe suppliers, customers, and the whole range?
Well, a number of things. As I said, I like employees to be involved in creating and generating the strategy.
Yeah.
So when you're doing that, you are already communicating with them. They're helping to build it. A lot of companies use roadshows. They go out to talk to their staff. Those are great as far as they go. The downside to them is there isn't often enough genuine communication. It tends to be, you know, us bigwigs going out there, standing on a platform and telling the staff how it's going to be. And that isn't the way to get buy-in and hearts and minds. We have to allow it to be a dialogue. And we maybe have to do workshopping and really work with teams. So in some respects, the staff are easier. We can tell them more. You know, in a competitive environment, it's quite hard to decide how much you can tell the outside world about your strategy. Stakeholders, some of them you will talk to in person. You know, your major shareholders, you'll get out there, you will have meetings with them, you will make sure that they're on board, because it's no good coming up with a strategy that your investors are horrified by. So a lot of that will be in person. You will probably have company magazines that go out to major stakeholders or web pages these days. So you'll have lots of different route for communications. But I think the strongest thing is being very clear in what your strategy is and what you're doing. And actually, the world picks up on it. It's really fascinating. You know, we know strategies of big organizations who've never told us a thing. They haven't interacted with us, but we can still tell you a bit about what they're doing, can't we? You know, we know about, you know, think of Elon Musk and Tesla. I've never spoken to him. I've never read any in-house magazines. I haven't read any adverts, but he goes out and does things that the press talks about. So we know that his overarching strategy, his big vision, is to land humans on Mars. And we kind of, you know, the public pick these things up because what we do speaks louder than anything we claim.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. There's a couple of questions coming in. One from Linda. Deborah, any tips on board cohesion when board NED appointments, majority makeup of board, tenure is only 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years is a challenge, I think. And in my opinion, it's too short. In Scotland, if you sit on a public sector or charity board, you generally get 6 years. And I think that's a lot easier. 3 years is difficult, and boards that are very non-exec, an advisory board, for example, where everyone's non-exec, I actually think are quite dangerous. I mean, we have to have them. You know, some sectors don't have the choice. But coming up with strategy without heavily involving the executive is very dangerous. So I think if you've got that sort of board, I would want senior executives totally driving the strategic discussion, not the non-execs, because the non-execs do not know enough about the organization. And I speak as someone who's been a non-exec, as I said, in all different industries for over 20 years. You will never know as much about how that organization ticks and how it works as the executives will. And you may have a really good understanding of the industry or the sector, and you may have a really good vision of where that organization needs to go in that industry. But strategy isn't just about the big, exciting vision. It's about bringing together, can we deliver it? So if you have that sort of advisory board, I strongly recommend that your strategy meetings involve a good number of not just the senior execs, but management level as well. So the discussion is in the round. Don't let non-execs make decisions about strategy. You just don't know enough about the business. I don't care how involved you try to be.
Wise words. Thank you, Deborah. A question from Muir. He says great stuff, Deborah, as well. Appreciative, Muir, as always.
Thank you, Muir.
Do you see different approaches between public, private, and third sector in developing strategy?
I can only talk from my own experience. The charities I've been involved in were exceptionally good at involving, you know, in some cases, the whole team. I've been to strategy events with a few hundred people at them, sort of workshopping. So I think charities are often much better. They have a sort of a mentality of consensus in a way that tends to drive that approach. The worst experience I've had with strategy is in the private sector, where a chief executive has gone to group board and saying, this is what I'm doing with my business. First of all, it's not his business, it is everyone's business. It is the shareholders and the stakeholders' business as well. But I'll share an example with you. No names, no pack drill. Yeah, I was at the Miller Group, and I loved my time at the Miller Group. They were amazing. I mean, I had a huge career there. It was fantastic. But they brought in a guy as a divisional chief exec. And I'd been a director there for 7 years at the time. I'd been running a business for about 3. And the business I was running was the most profitable and the fastest growing in the housing division. So we were a very successful business. I had an amazing team of people who were really passionate. I was really, really lucky. So, you know, we were running this fantastic little business. Well, I say little, it was about, in today's money, it was about 100 odd million, but in those days it was about 40 million. And they brought in this new guy, and we were sitting in a board meeting, and he said, we will not be doing any more affordable housing. Wow, where did that come from? I mean, that is a massive strategic move, massive. Now, at the time, as I said, I was running a business that mainstream housing, you know, the Wimpy, the Barretts, Bellways, all of these people that you'll know. And we were running partnership housing, what we call affordable housing these days. And in those days, you worked in Scotland with Scottish Homes, who are a government body, and you worked with regional councils, local authorities, housing associations, always in partnership, hence the term. Now, he didn't understand affordable housing because to him, it was very, very low margin. You know, you go into often very troublesome council estates, you demolish horrible 1960s terraces, flats, whatever, and you replace them, usually with 2 and 3 bedrooms, maybe some flats. Very low value, the margin is tiny. You're almost competing with the construction companies. And believe me, some construction companies survive on 1 to 2% profit. It's a very tight margin business, a bit like some of the retailers. So he didn't see that as being house building. He saw it as something construction guys could do. They can go and build the houses. Okay, so he just, instead of having any discussion at the boardroom table, he said, we will not be doing any more affordable housing. So me being me, I leant forward a little bit and said, I'm sorry, could we discuss that? And he leaned forward a bit more and he said, we will not be doing any more affordable housing. And I said, I'm terribly sorry. I heard what you said. I was asking if we could discuss it. And guess what he did? He leaned even further towards me and he said, we will not be doing any more affordable housing. So that was his big strategic decision, okay? Now, why was that a really bad strategic decision? Well, the first thing was, when you are doing mainstream housing, your cash flow is scary as hell because you start a site. First of all, you cough up millions to buy the site. Then you start digging holes in the ground and putting roads in and sewers and water supply and all of that stuff. So you've got millions going out of the door. And eventually after, 6 to 8, 9 months, you're building houses. And if you're really, really lucky at the end of that process, people come and buy those houses. So there's a huge element of risk in it, huge element of risk. It's called speculative house building. And you pump loads of money out of the door before you've got a hope of bringing money back in with sales. Now, of course, what you do as a house builder is you try and stagger the development so that some are making money at the sales stage while you're putting money into the ground, on the new projects. Affordable housing, very, very low margin. But once you've done the deal, you just got to build the houses.
Yeah.
So all you got to do is control your costs. You have completely de-risked that project because the housing association are going to take them off your hands at an agreed price. So all you're doing is building the houses. So if you imagine drawing your cash flow, imagine drawing your minds for yourselves, a nice little graph. So spec house building, spending money, you're back to front, aren't you? So spending money like this and making money like that, which makes you quite vulnerable in the middle, as you can imagine. Affordable housing, you get paid at different stages. So your money going out is pretty much matched by your money coming in almost immediately. So what it gave us was huge certainty on the core overhead recovery of our business. I knew I could pay for my staff just from the deals that we were doing on the affordable side. So that was a great business model. Yeah. But more importantly, the planning regime was changing. So you were not allowed to do any mainstream site without doing some affordable housing.
Yeah.
And we had huge competitive advantage in affordable housing. We were one of the top 2 players in the UK marketplace, especially in Scotland. We were one of the top 2. Huge barriers to entry. Strategically, you want to be in a business where there's barriers to entry. So we had this really powerful business model, and he just came and went.
Yeah, well,
you can imagine.
Very minimal personal skills and self-awareness and emotional intelligence, I would say. We're very quickly running out of time.
Absolutely, sorry.
I've just got one. No, it's been great, and we're enjoying every minute of it. I wanted to acknowledge Barbara's point about a really great point, Deborah, all too often non-execs with arm's length in the previous question. Thanks, Barbara, for that insightful point. Very briefly, I'm going to take the final 2 questions together. They have some linkage. From Robert Varley, first of all, we live in uncertain times, perhaps more so than any time in our living memory, as COVID has taught us. Any thoughts on how to balance the clarity of purpose, consistency of vision with an increasingly unpredictable and challenging external environment? And then Glenn kind of adds to that in terms of very insightful generally. What have been the more common strategic shifts impacted by Brexit and COVID? And those two massive issues of our time in probably about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, Deborah, sorry.
They are amazing questions. Strategically, they are the worst things we've ever had to face. And they're nationwide for the UK, but COVID is global. The first thing I've done is we've realized how agile we can be as organizations. We have had to change because of COVID some way or another. I mean, look at us all here in the virtual environment. I can remember watching Star Trek and thinking, oh, look, they talk to people on the screen. That'll be the day. And here we are. And most of us are running our businesses this way. So I think the first thing is we've learned how unbelievably agile we can be. In many respects, I think Brexit is a bigger challenge because COVID, it has hit us. We have to deal with it. Brexit, we still don't know what it's going to look like. Yeah, it's not looking good. You know, it's looking very no dealish, which is not good. But that means that the whole of that macro environment intelligence that we draw on to create our strategy has been thrown up in the air. Yeah. We actually don't know how we will be doing business. We don't know who in our supply chain is going to be greatly affected by Brexit or not, even if we think we're not. So I think the bigger challenge of the two is actually weirdly Brexit. Yeah. COVID, we are kind of muddling through and finding ways to deal with. Brexit, until we know what size and shape it is, which may be in a matter of days, may not be for another few months if they start extending the deadline, there is such massive uncertainty about supply chains, access to money, access to marketplaces. We don't even have lots of trade deals in place yet. And I know some companies say, look, we don't do anything internationally. It's not going to affect us. Yes, it is. It is going to affect you, whatever sector you're in, because there will be somewhere in your supply chain, in your partnerships, in your joint ventures, something you buy, something you use will be impacted by Brexit. And that, as you use the term, the great uncertainty, that is the biggest problem with Brexit. With strategy, you try to iron out as many of the uncertainties as you can to make well-informed decisions.
Well, thank you so much on that point of uncertainty. One thing for certain today is that we've had a real tour de force of Jean and Talita, and now yourself, Deborah, giving us an oversight and strategy. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. We're most grateful to you for giving us your time today. And we appreciate everything that you've told us about and given us a snapshot and a flavor of what the course will be like. Having done the course myself, you know, it's great to almost revisit, and I'm sure that everybody on the call today will be appreciative of that. And another reminder that we will be running face-to-face courses in 2021. We hope, please God. And then maybe we'll have the opportunity of seeing you then. That would be great. In the meantime, can I thank you very much indeed for giving us your time. Can I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today on what really has been a celebration of learning. And we are most grateful to you for staying with us, many of you, for the full 3 hours. Time goes very quickly when you're enjoying yourself, and it's been hugely enjoyable. Deborah, thank you once again. Thank you all for being with us. Can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and above all, look after yourselves and stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you again on screen or perhaps in person. Thank you. God bless. Nice to see you.